The day Landon Pierce's 5-year-old son asked why he didn't have a mommy, like the other kids, the billionaire CEO felt his perfectly constructed world crack wide open. He could buy anything except an honest answer. So he did something desperate. He walked away from his empire, buried his identity, and went searching for someone who would love his boy without knowing there were 9 zeros in the bank account. He found her in a rundown diner, serving coffee with hands that trembled. But the lie he told to protect his son would become the very thing that destroyed them all. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and stay until the end, because what happens next will break your heart before it puts it back together. The rain hit the windows of Pierce Industries' executive suite like accusations Landon couldn't answer. 43 floors above Chicago, he stood with his forehead pressed against the glass, watching the city blur into watercolor streaks of red and white. His reflection stared back, expensive suit, tired eyes. A face that had been on the cover of Forbes 3 times but couldn't fool a kindergartner. "Daddy?" Landon turned. His son stood in the doorway of the corner office, small and uncertain in his school uniform. The nanny, Mrs. Chen, hovered behind him with an apologetic expression that Landon had seen too many times. "Hey, buddy." Landon crouched down, trying to shake off the weight of the quarterly projections that had consumed his afternoon. "What are you doing here? I thought you had art class." "I finished early." Oliver's voice was quiet, the way it always got when something was bothering him. He clutched a piece of construction paper, the edges crumpled from small, anxious fingers. "What have you got there?" Oliver held out the paper. It was a drawing, stick figures in front of a house. A tall one, a small one, and a blank space where a third figure should have been. Other kids' drawings were taped around it, and every single one had 3 people. Moms with triangle dresses, dads with briefcases, kids with wide smiles. "We had to draw our families," Oliver said. Landon's chest tightened. "It's a great drawing, Ollie." "Why don't I have a mommy?" The question landed like a fist. Landon had been preparing for this conversation for years, had rehearsed answers with child psychologists and grief counselors, had read books about helping children process loss. None of it mattered now. His throat closed up. "You had a mommy," Landon said carefully. "Remember? We've talked about this. Mommy got very sick when you were little, and I know she died." Oliver's eyes were dry but serious in the way that 5-year-olds shouldn't have to be. "But Tyler's mom died too, and now he has a new mom. She brings cupcakes to school and she does funny voices when she reads stories. Why can't I have that?" Landon pulled Oliver into his arms, feeling the small body press against his shirt. "It's complicated, buddy. That's what you always say when you don't want to answer." Out of the mouths of children. Landon closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of his son's strawberry shampoo. "You're too smart for your own good." "Mrs. Chen says that too." "Mrs. Chen is very wise." Oliver pulled back, studying his father's face with an intensity that made Landon uncomfortable. "Don't you get lonely, Daddy?" The rain kept falling. Somewhere 43 floors below, people were rushing home to families, to partners who asked about their day, to children who had 2 parents at bedtime. Landon had quarterly earnings and an empty penthouse, and a son who was starting to notice all the things money couldn't buy. "Sometimes," Landon admitted, "me too." That night, after Oliver fell asleep clutching a stuffed elephant that had belonged to his mother, Landon sat in his home office with a glass of scotch he didn't drink and a stack of contracts he didn't read. The drawing was on his desk. Those 3 stick figures, that empty space. He thought about dating. He'd tried it in the 2 years since he'd finally accepted that Caroline wasn't coming back, that the brain aneurysm had taken her too fast for goodbyes. He'd gone to charity galas and business dinners, had been introduced to socialites and executives and women who laughed at all the right moments. Every single one of them had known exactly who he was. Landon Pierce, 32, self-made billionaire, youngest CEO in Pierce Industries history. They'd known his net worth before they knew his middle name. The few who had met Oliver had tried too hard. Designer toys as first-date gifts, over-the-top enthusiasm that felt rehearsed. One woman had actually asked if Oliver came with a trust fund. Landon had stopped trying after that. But now, looking at that drawing, something shifted. The question wasn't whether Oliver needed a mother. The question was whether Landon could find someone who wanted to be one, not because of the penthouse or the private jet or the stock options, but because they actually gave a damn about a 5-year-old boy who drew pictures with people missing. The idea came to him slowly, like something rising from deep water. What if nobody knew who he was? He turned it over in his mind, testing the edges. It was crazy, impossible, the kind of thing that only worked in movies. But then again, how many people actually knew what Landon Pierce looked like? He'd built his fortune in enterprise software, not consumer tech. His photo had been in business publications, sure, but how many regular people read those? He'd carefully avoided social media, kept his personal life locked down after Caroline died. Most of Chicago knew the Pierce name, but the face? The more he thought about it, the more possible it seemed. He could step away from the company for a while. God knew he had competent people running everything anyway. He could move to a different neighborhood, somewhere he'd never been. Somewhere nobody would expect a billionaire to set foot. He could dress differently, act differently, be someone ordinary, someone struggling, even. A single dad trying to make ends meet, looking for help, for kindness, for someone who might care about his kid without seeing dollar signs first. It was insane. It was desperate. It was also, Landon realized with a clarity that felt like vertigo, the only way he could ever know for sure. He spent the next week planning. It felt like preparing for an undercover operation, which wasn't far from the truth. He grew out his beard, let his hair get a little shaggy. He bought clothes from Target and Walmart, stood in the fluorescent-lit aisles feeling like an anthropologist in a foreign country. Jeans that weren't tailored. T-shirts without designer labels. A jacket with a broken zipper that he didn't immediately replace. He found an apartment in Bridgeport, a working-class neighborhood on the south side where nobody knew him and nobody cared. The building was old, with radiators that clanked and stairs that creaked, and the rent was less than he spent on coffee in a month. He furnished it from thrift stores and Craigslist, bought secondhand everything, created a life that looked like struggle. His CFO thought he was having a breakdown. His lawyers thought he was committing some kind of fraud. His therapist asked a lot of careful questions about grief and coping mechanisms and whether Landon had considered that he might be running from something instead of toward it. "I'm running toward my son having a mother," Landon said. "By lying about who you are? By finding someone who cares about who I actually am." The therapist had made a note. Landon had signed another check. The hardest part was telling Oliver, not the whole truth. 5-year-olds couldn't keep that kind of secret, but enough. "We're going to play pretend for a while," Landon explained, kneeling in front of his son in the penthouse one last time. "Like a game. We're going to live in a different apartment, and I'm going to dress different, and we're going to pretend that Daddy doesn't work at a big company anymore." Oliver's brow furrowed. "Why?" "Because I want to meet someone who likes us for real. Not because we have a lot of money, but because we're fun to be around. Does that make sense?" "Like Cinderella," Oliver said. "She had to go to the ball in disguise so the prince would like her for who she really was." "Exactly like that, buddy. But you're not trying to meet a prince." "No, I'm trying to meet someone who could be your mom." Oliver considered this seriously. "Okay, but can I bring my toys?" "Some of them. And Mrs. Chen?" "Mrs. Chen is going to visit sometimes, but she's going to pretend to be our friend, not our nanny. Can you remember that?" Oliver nodded. "I'm good at pretend." The move happened on a Tuesday. Landon hired a service to transport their things in an unmarked truck, paid cash, left no trail. The penthouse stood empty behind them, locked and waiting like a life on pause. In the Bridgeport apartment, Oliver ran from room to room, delighted by the smallness of it, by the way his voice echoed different, by the neighbor's dog barking through the walls. "It smells funny," Oliver announced. "It's called character," Landon said, though it mostly smelled like old carpet and someone else's cooking. "I like it." For the first 3 days, Landon felt like he was suffocating. The apartment was 600 square feet. He could hear everything: neighbors fighting, babies crying, someone's bass-heavy music at 2 a.m. The shower pressure was terrible. The stove only had 3 working burners. He kept reaching for things that weren't there: his espresso machine, his king-size bed, his closet full of custom suits. But Oliver was happy. He made friends with the kid next door, played in the small courtyard, helped Landon cook pasta that came from a box instead of a private chef. And slowly Landon felt something shift. Not comfort exactly, but a kind of lightness. Nobody here knew him. Nobody wanted anything from him. He was just another single dad in a building full of people trying to get by. The diner came into his life by accident. He'd been walking Oliver home from the neighborhood park when the rain started, sudden and heavy the way Chicago rain came in October. They ducked under the nearest awning, which happened to belong to a place called Rosie's. Through the steamed-up windows, Landon could see red vinyl booths and a counter with spinning stools and a waitress with a coffee pot making her rounds. "I'm hungry," Oliver said. "We have food at home. Please? It smells good." It did smell good. Coffee and bacon and something baking. Landon checked his watch, which was a Timex now instead of a Rolex, and thought about the leftover pasta waiting in their apartment. "All right, but just this once." The bell above the door chimed when they entered. The diner was small and worn, with cracked vinyl and formica tables that had seen better decades. A few customers scattered in booths, an old man at the counter reading a newspaper, and behind the counter, refilling coffee with careful precision, was a woman who looked up when they walked in. "Sit anywhere," she said, and her voice was soft, almost apologetic, like she was sorry to interrupt their thoughts. Landon steered Oliver to a booth by the window. The menus were laminated and sticky, offering breakfast all day and sandwiches and pies. Oliver pressed his nose against the glass display case showcasing slices of banana cream and cherry and something chocolate. "Can I get pie?" "After real food." "Pie is real." The waitress appeared at their table, pad and pen ready. Up close, Landon could see she was younger than he'd first thought. Maybe 30, maybe a little less. She had dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, eyes that seemed tired but kind, and hands that shook just slightly as she held the pen. She wore no makeup. Her name tag said Ellie in faded letters. "What can I get you?" she asked, and again that soft voice, like she was afraid of taking up too much space in the world. "What's good?" Landon asked. A small smile touched her lips. "The meatloaf is fresh today. The soup is homemade, vegetable barley. And the pie is all from scratch if you save room." "We're saving room," Oliver announced. Ellie's smile widened just a fraction, and she looked at Oliver directly for the first time. "Smart man. Which kind are you thinking?" "What's your favorite?" She crouched down a little, getting to his eye level, and Landon noticed the way she did it. Not condescending, not performing, just natural. "The banana cream is my favorite, but that's because my grandma taught me to make it. The cherry is really good if you like things tart, and the chocolate is for when you're very, very hungry." "I'm very, very hungry," Oliver said seriously. "Chocolate it is, then." She took their order, meatloaf for Landon, chicken fingers for Oliver, which Landon would have never allowed before but seemed fine now, and disappeared into the kitchen. Through the window, Landon watched her moving behind the counter, precise and quiet, refilling coffee, delivering plates, wiping down surfaces with a kind of methodical care. "I like her," Oliver said. "You just met her." "She's nice. She talked to me like a real person." The food came fast and tasted better than Landon expected. Not fancy, not innovative, just solid and warm and made by someone who cared. The meatloaf was actually homemade. The mashed potatoes were real. And when Ellie brought Oliver's chocolate pie, she'd added a scoop of vanilla ice cream without being asked. "On the house," she said when Landon tried to protest. "We don't charge extra for making kids smile." Oliver ate his pie with intense concentration, getting chocolate on his nose, and Ellie laughed, a soft, surprise sound, like she didn't do it often. Landon watched her move through the diner, watched the way she remembered how the old man at the counter took his coffee, watched her slip an extra napkin to a woman whose toddler was making a mess, watched her exist in this small space with a quiet grace that felt completely unperformed. When they left, Landon paid cash and left a 20% tip, which was modest for him and generous for here. Ellie's eyes widened slightly when she saw it. "Thank you," she said. "Come back any time." Walking home in the rain, Oliver chattering about the pie, Landon realized he was already planning to. He told himself it was research. He needed to observe, to understand what kind of person Ellie was before making any decisions. So he went back the next day. And the day after that, always at different times, always with different excuses. Coffee in the morning, lunch on a Tuesday, dinner on a Thursday when he didn't feel like cooking. Ellie was always there, quiet and steady, moving through the diner like she was part of its bones. Landon learned things by watching. She arrived before dawn to help with the baking. She knew every regular by name. She carried extra pens because hers always seemed to run out. She wore the same 3 shirts in rotation, all of them a little faded, and her shoes had been resoled at least twice. She was also, Landon noticed, painfully shy. When customers tried to make conversation beyond orders, she'd smile and nod but rarely engage. She kept her eyes down when men looked at her too long. She apologized constantly, for things that weren't her fault, for things that didn't need apologies, for existing in spaces that required her to be seen. But with kids, something changed. A young mother came in one afternoon with a crying baby, frazzled and exhausted, and Ellie brought a warm towel without being asked, offered to hold the baby while the mother ate, sang a soft lullaby that Landon couldn't quite hear, but that made the infant quiet. With Oliver, she always crouched down, always asked real questions, always listened like his 5-year-old observations about dinosaurs and playground politics actually mattered. "Why do we keep coming here?" Oliver asked after the 5th visit. "You don't like it?" "I love it. Ellie's teaching me to fold napkins into swans." "She is?" "She says every good restaurant person should know fancy folding." "Is this a fancy restaurant?" Landon looked around at the cracked vinyl and the flickering neon sign. "I think she's teaching you because she's nice." "Oh." Oliver thought about this. "Are you going to ask her to be my mom?" Landon nearly choked on his coffee. "What?" "You said we were pretending so you could meet someone who could be my mom, and you keep bringing me here. So I thought maybe it was her." 5-year-olds were terrifying in their perception. "I'm just getting to know her," Landon said carefully. "I already know her. She's perfect." "People aren't perfect, buddy." "She is for me." That night, Landon lay awake in his small bedroom, listening to Chicago sounds he'd never noticed from the penthouse. Sirens, the L train, someone's television through the wall. He thought about Ellie's shaking hands, her apologetic voice, the way she flinched when people moved too fast near her. He thought about how she lived, working double shifts in a diner that probably paid minimum wage, wearing shoes held together with duct tape, existing in a world that seemed to have taught her to make herself small. And he thought about what he was doing, the lie he was constructing, the life he was pretending to live. The thing was, it didn't feel entirely like pretending anymore. In the Bridgeport apartment, wearing Target jeans and cooking boxed pasta, playing cards with Oliver on the living room floor because they didn't have a game room, this felt more real than the penthouse ever had. More present. More like actually living instead of just managing assets and attending meetings and existing in a space between transactions. But it was still a lie, and every time Ellie smiled at him, every time she asked how his day was in that soft voice, every time she slipped Oliver an extra cookie or taught him a new way to fold napkins, Landon felt the weight of what he wasn't telling her. He tried to justify it. He was protecting himself and his son. He was trying to find something genuine in a world that had only ever shown him performance. "You're falling for her," his therapist said during their phone session, because Landon couldn't exactly show up to the Loop office anymore. "I'm not." "Landon, I'm observing, gathering data. You've been to this diner 15 times in 2 weeks. That's not data collection. That's courtship." Landon didn't have an answer for that. The first real conversation happened on a Wednesday evening. Landon had come in alone. Oliver was with Mrs. Chen, who still visited under the guise of being an old family friend, and the diner was nearly empty. Ellie brought him coffee without asking, had learned he took it black. "Quiet night," Landon observed. "Happens sometimes midweek." She wiped down the counter, even though it was already clean. "Most people are tired of eating out by Wednesday, waiting for the weekend. But not you. I work weekends." "Every weekend?" A small shrug. "Rent doesn't pay itself." Landon sipped his coffee. "You live around here?" 2 blocks over. "You?" "Bridgeport. Just moved a couple months ago." "From where?" He'd prepared for this. "The suburbs. After my wife died, I couldn't stay in our old place. Too many memories." Ellie's expression shifted, something soft and sad crossing her face. "I'm sorry. It's been 2 years, still hard sometimes." "I bet." She poured herself a coffee, which was the first time he'd seen her take a break. "Your son seems like he's doing okay, though." "Oh, Oliver's resilient. Kids are better at this than adults. Or they just hide it better." Landon looked at her more carefully. You sound like you know something about that. For a moment, he thought she'd close down, retreat into that apologetic shyness, but instead she wrapped both hands around her coffee cup and said, I lost my mom when I was 7. Car accident. People always told me I was handling it so well, that I was so brave, but really, I just didn't know how else to be. Who raised you? My grandma. She was amazing. Worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat, taught me everything I know about cooking, made sure I graduated high school. Ellie's voice had gone even softer, if that was possible. She died 5 years ago. I'm sorry. Yeah. She took a sip of coffee. Me too. They sat in silence for a moment, and it didn't feel awkward. Just 2 people who understood what loss tasted like, sitting in a worn diner while rain started up again outside. The banana cream pie, Landon said. You said your grandma taught you. Ellie's face brightened slightly. Every Sunday. She had this theory that you could tell everything about a person by how they made pie crust. Too much water and you're impatient. Too little and you're afraid of commitment. She said the perfect crust required paying attention and trusting yourself. What kind of crust do you make? Pretty good ones, actually. A real smile now, small but genuine. Grandma would be proud. I'm sure she would be. Ellie looked at him for a long moment, and Landon had the uncomfortable sensation of being seen in a way he hadn't expected. Not as Landon Pierce, billionaire, not as the disguise he was wearing, just as a man sitting in a diner, drinking coffee, talking about loss. You should bring Oliver by on Sunday, Ellie said. I'm testing a new recipe. Could use an honest opinion from a pie expert. He'd love that. What about you? I'd love that too. And there it was, the moment when observation became something else. When the plan to find someone suitable became the reality of wanting someone specific. Landon walked home that night through Chicago streets that smelled like rain and fried food and exhaust, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just stepped off a cliff. Sunday came with October sunshine, the kind of day when the city pretended it wasn't about to freeze for 6 months. Landon dressed Oliver in his nicest clothes, which were still thrift store jeans and a striped shirt, but clean at least, and they walked to Rosie's together. Ellie had saved them a booth. The diner was busier on weekends, families and couples and lone readers with newspapers, but she appeared at their table with that soft smile and 2 slices of what looked like heaven on plates. Apple cranberry, she announced. New recipe. Be honest. Oliver dug in immediately, made a sound of pure joy, and got crumbs everywhere. Landon took a more measured bite and understood why Ellie worked in this small diner instead of somewhere fancy. The crust was perfect, buttery, flaky, exactly the right amount of give. The filling was tart and sweet at once, the cranberries cutting through the apple's richness, and there was something else, some warmth he couldn't place. Cardamom, he guessed. Ellie's eyes widened. Yes. How did you? Most people can't identify it. My wife liked to cook, taught me to pay attention to flavors. She had good taste. She did. They ate pie in comfortable silence, and Landon watched Ellie work. She moved differently on Sundays, less tired somehow, more present. She laughed with the regular customers, had learned their kids' names, brought extra whipped cream without being asked. And every time she passed their booth, she checked in. More coffee? How's the pie? Did Oliver want to see the kitchen? Oliver absolutely wanted to see the kitchen. Ellie led them back into the heart of Rosie's, which was cramped and old and smelled like decades of cooking. The owner, a woman in her 60s with flour in her hair, waved at them without pausing in her work. This is Rosie, Ellie said. She's owned this place for 30 years. 32, Rosie corrected. And Ellie here's been my best employee for 6. Girl's got magic hands with pastry. Ellie blushed, and showed Oliver around. The industrial mixer, the walk-in fridge, the shelves of ingredients. She lifted him up so he could see the pies cooling on racks, explained how you had to wait for them to set, taught him the difference between crimping and fluting. Landon stood back and watched his son absorb information like he was learning state secrets, and felt something crack open in his chest. This was what Oliver needed, not expensive tutors or private schools or toys that cost more than most people's rent. Just someone who paid attention, who answered his questions seriously, who crouched down to his level and made him feel like he mattered. Your boy's a natural, Rosie said quietly, appearing at Landon's elbow. He loves food. His mom used to let him help in the kitchen. Ellie told me you lost your wife. That's rough. We're managing. Rosie studied him with eyes that had seen a lot of life. Ellie's a good one. Quiet, but good. Don't get many people like her. There was something in the way she said it. A warning, maybe, or a test. Landon just nodded. When they left the diner that afternoon, Oliver's pockets were full of cookies Ellie had wrapped in napkins, and his head was full of information about cream of tartar and blind baking and why you should never overwork dough. Landon's head was full of something much more dangerous. I really like her, Dad, Oliver said, holding Landon's hand as they walked home. I know, buddy. Do you like her? Yeah, I do. So can we keep her? Landon stopped walking. They were standing on a corner in Bridgeport, autumn leaves skittering across the sidewalk, the afternoon sun warm on their faces. His son looked up at him with such hope, such uncomplicated faith, that this thing could actually work. It's not that simple, Landon started. Why not? Because I'm lying to her. Because she doesn't know who I really am. Because when she finds out, she's going to hate me. Because I've built this whole thing on a foundation made of omissions and carefully constructed poverty and the kind of deception that people don't forgive. But he couldn't say that to a 5-year-old. Because people are complicated, Landon said instead. Ellie's not complicated. She's nice and she makes good pie and she doesn't treat me like a baby. You're right. So we can keep her? Landon looked at his son, at the hope written across his small face, and made a decision that he knew was probably wrong but felt inevitable anyway. Let's see, he said. Let's get to know her better first. Oliver seemed satisfied with that. Landon was satisfied with nothing, but the momentum had already started, the wheels were already turning, and stopping now felt impossible. Over the next weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Landon and Oliver would show up at Rosie's 3-4 times a week. Sometimes they'd eat, sometimes just have pie and coffee. Sometimes they'd arrive near closing and help Ellie wipe down tables and stack chairs. Landon learned that she took the bus to work because she didn't have a car. He learned that she'd been trying to save money for culinary school but kept having to dip into her savings for emergencies. A broken tooth, a sick landlord who raised the rent, her nephew's medical bills. He learned that she was funny in a quiet way, that she noticed everything about people, that she remembered small details like how Oliver liked his grilled cheese cut in triangles and that Landon rubbed his left shoulder when he was tired. And slowly, so slowly Landon almost didn't notice it happening, she started to relax around them. Her voice got a little louder. Her smiles came easier. She started sharing stories about her grandmother's terrible singing voice, about the time she accidentally made a pie with salt instead of sugar, about her dream of maybe one day having her own small restaurant where she could cook the food she actually wanted to make. What kind of food is that? Landon asked one evening when the diner was empty and Ellie was teaching Oliver to make whipped cream by hand. Comfort food but elevated, like really good meatloaf with red wine gravy, mac and cheese with Gruyere and fresh thyme, pot roast that's been braising all day. She shrugged, embarrassed. I know it's not fancy. It sounds perfect. My grandma always said the best food is the kind that makes people feel cared for. I want to make people feel that way. She already did, Landon thought. Every time she brought someone coffee, every time she remembered how they took it, every time she slipped extra bacon to a regular or saved the corner piece of pie for someone who liked the crust-to-filling ratio just so. She was already making people feel cared for. She just couldn't see it. You'd be amazing, Landon said, and meant it. Ellie looked at him with something like surprise, like she wasn't used to being told she was capable of amazing things. That night, walking home with Oliver half asleep on his shoulder, Landon made a phone call to his CFO. I need you to do something, he said, quietly. How quietly? Completely anonymous, no trace back to me. What are we talking about? There's a woman. She's trying to save for culinary school, but she's never going to get there at the rate she's going. I want to set up a scholarship, anonymous donor, legitimate foundation, the whole thing. Can you make that happen? Silence on the other end of the line. Then, Landon, what are you doing? Something good for once. By lying to her. By helping her. Does she know who you really are? Landon didn't answer. Jesus Christ, you're in deep, aren't you? Just set up the scholarship. And when she finds out? When this all blows up in your face? It won't. But even as he said it, Landon knew he was lying to himself now too. This couldn't last. Sooner or later, something would slip. Someone would recognize him. The truth would come out. And when it did, he looked down at Oliver, asleep and trusting, and then thought about Ellie's soft smile, her shaking hands, the way she'd started to bloom around them like a flower that had finally found the right light. When the truth came out, it was going to destroy everything. But that was a problem for later. Right now, walking through Chicago with his son sleeping on his shoulder and autumn in the air, Landon let himself believe in the lie a little longer. The scholarship letter arrived at Rosie's on a Tuesday morning in early November, delivered by courier to Ellie Harper, and Landon watched from his usual booth as she opened it with shaking hands. He'd been careful. The foundation was real. He'd had his lawyers set it up weeks ago under a name that couldn't be traced back to Pierce Industries. The Julia Morgan Culinary Education Fund named after an architect because Landon figured cooking and building weren't that different. Both required vision and precision and the ability to create something from nothing. The selection committee was legitimate, made up of retired chefs and restaurant owners who had no idea one of the anonymous donors was sitting in a Bridgeport diner watching a waitress read the letter that would change her life. Ellie's face went pale, then pink, then pale again. She read the letter twice, then a third time, her lips moving silently over the words. When she looked up, her eyes were wet. "I got in," she said to Rosie, who was refilling the coffee station. "I got the scholarship." "What scholarship?" Rosie came over, wiping her hands on her apron. "I applied months ago. I didn't think... There's this culinary program at the community college. It's not fancy, but it's good. And I applied for this scholarship, but there were probably hundreds of applicants, and I never thought..." Ellie's words tumbled over each other, her usual quiet voice rising with something Landon realized was hope. "It's full tuition, books, supplies, everything. I start in January." Rosie pulled Ellie into a hug that looked like it might crack ribs. "About damn time something good happened to you." Landon felt Oliver tug on his sleeve. "Did you do that?" his son whispered. "Shh. Dad, not now, buddy." But Oliver was looking at him with those two knowing eyes, and Landon realized his son had figured it out. 5 years old and already understanding that sometimes love meant doing things in secret, meant being the answer to prayers you weren't supposed to hear. Ellie came over to their booth, the letter still clutched in her hand, and she was crying now, not even trying to hide it. "I'm sorry," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "I'm a mess. This is the best thing that's happened to me in so long." "Don't apologize," Landon said. "This is amazing. You deserve it." "I didn't even think they'd read my application. I wrote it at 3 in the morning after a double shift, and my essay was probably terrible, and..." "They read it," Landon said, "and they saw what I see. Someone who cares about food, who cares about people, who's going to be incredible at this." Ellie wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing mascara she probably didn't remember putting on. "Thank you for saying that. For..." She gestured vaguely at the booth, at the diner, at the weeks of them showing up and eating her pie and listening to her talk about her grandmother's recipes. "For making me feel like maybe I'm not crazy for wanting this." Oliver slid out of the booth and hugged her around the waist, fierce and sudden. Ellie looked startled for a moment. Then her expression softened and she hugged him back, one hand on his head, and Landon watched them and felt like he was standing on the edge of something vast and terrifying. "You're going to be the best chef," Oliver said, his voice muffled against her apron. "The very best," Ellie agreed. That night, Rosie threw an impromptu celebration at the diner after closing. She invited the regulars, made a cake that said, "Congratulations, Chef Ellie," in shaky frosting letters, and someone brought champagne that was probably too cheap but tasted like victory anyway. Ellie laughed more than Landon had ever seen, her cheeks pink, her guard completely down, and when she caught his eye across the room, she mouthed, "Thank you," even though she had no idea what she was thanking him for. Landon raised his plastic cup in a silent toast and tried not to think about the fact that he was celebrating a lie. The weeks that followed had a dreamlike quality, time moving both too fast and too slow. Ellie gave her notice at Rosie's. She'd keep working part-time once classes started, but she needed to cut back to focus on school. She started buying textbooks from the used bookstore, stayed up late reading about mother sauces and knife skills and the Maillard reaction. She showed Landon her highlighted pages like they were treasure maps, her excitement so pure it hurt to witness. and she spent more time with Oliver. It happened gradually, so naturally that Landon almost didn't notice the shift. She started sitting with them during her breaks instead of just taking their orders. She taught Oliver to make simple things: scrambled eggs, grilled cheese, chocolate chip cookies from her grandmother's recipe that required creaming butter and sugar by hand. She asked about his day at school, his friends, his favorite books, and she listened to his answers like they mattered. "Miss Ellie is nice," Oliver said one evening as Landon was tucking him in. "I like her a lot." "I know you do." "Do you think she likes us?" Landon thought about the way Ellie smiled when they walked into the diner, the way she saved them the booth by the window, the way she'd started calling them her boys when she talked to Rosie. "Yeah, buddy, I think she does." "Good." Oliver yawned, clutching his stuffed elephant. "Because I think she should be my mom." "It's not that simple." "You keep saying that, but it seems pretty simple to me. We like her, she likes us. You ask her to marry you, and then we're a family." Out of the mouths of children. If only the world worked the way 5-year-olds thought it should. "We'll see," Landon said, which was what adults said when they meant probably not, but I don't want to break your heart yet. Oliver seemed to sense this. "You're scared." "Of what?" "That she won't like you if she knows the truth." Landon froze. "What truth?" "That we're pretending, that we're not really poor, that you're actually—" Oliver's voice dropped to a whisper, like saying it too loud might make the walls fall down. "Rich." "How did you—" "I'm 5, not stupid. Mrs. Chen told me we'd go back to the big apartment soon. And you get all weird when people ask about your job. And sometimes you talk different when you forget." Landon sat on the edge of Oliver's bed, feeling the weight of all his carefully constructed lies pressing down. "Are you mad at me?" "No. I like this apartment, and I really like Miss Ellie." Oliver looked at his father seriously. "But I think you should tell her. She won't be mad." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do. She's not like those other ladies who wanted to marry you for money. She doesn't care about that stuff." That's exactly why I can't tell her, because when she finds out I lied—" "Then don't lie anymore," Oliver said, like it was the simplest thing in the world. Landon kissed his son's forehead, turned out the light, and went to sit in the living room with a beer he didn't drink and a problem he didn't know how to solve. He could tell her the truth, walk into Rosie's tomorrow and say, "Hey Ellie, funny story. I'm actually a billionaire, and I've been pretending to be poor because I wanted to find someone who'd love my kid for real, and surprise, it's you. Isn't that romantic?" Except it wasn't romantic. It was manipulative and dishonest, and exactly the kind of thing that would make someone like Ellie, someone who'd been overlooked and underestimated her whole life, feel used and stupid for believing in him. Or he could keep lying, keep playing the struggling single dad, keep letting her think they were in this together, keep building a relationship on a foundation that would eventually crack. Neither option was good. But one option meant losing her now, and the other meant maybe, possibly, having a little more time. Landon was still sitting there at midnight when his phone rang. His CFO, calling from what was probably his 4th martini at some downtown bar. "We have a problem," Marcus said. "What kind of problem?" "The kind where you've been AWOL for 2 months and the board is getting nervous. They want you back. They want a face-to-face meeting. Schedule it for next month. They want it next week, Tuesday, non-negotiable." Landon closed his eyes. Tuesday was when Ellie started her culinary classes. She'd asked if he and Oliver wanted to come to the community college afterward, see where she'd be spending her time, maybe grab dinner to celebrate her first day. "I can't do Tuesday." "You don't have a choice. Landon, you own 40% of this company, but the board still has power and they're starting to ask questions about your mental state. You miss this meeting, they're going to call for a vote of no confidence. Let them vote. Are you insane? You built this company from nothing. You're going to throw it away for, what? A woman you're lying to? A fake life in a shitty apartment? Watch it." Marcus sighed and Landon could hear ice clinking in a glass. "I'm sorry, that was out of line. But seriously, man, what's the endgame here?" Landon didn't have an answer. The meeting was scheduled for Tuesday at 10 in the morning, which meant Landon could theoretically make it back to Bridgeport in time to meet Ellie after her class. He told Oliver they'd have to skip breakfast at Rosie's that day, which earned him a disappointed look but no argument. What he didn't anticipate was running into James Carmichael in the lobby of Pierce Industries. James was a board member, old money, the kind of guy who wore bow ties unironically and thought disruption was something that happened to other people's industries. He was also someone who'd been to Landon's house for dinner parties back when Caroline was alive, who knew what Landon looked like in a tuxedo instead of Target jeans. Landon saw him too late. He'd been focused on getting to the elevator, on making this meeting quick so he could get back to Bridgeport, and he didn't notice James until the man was already turning around. Their eyes met. James's expression went from polite neutrality to confusion to recognition in about 3 seconds. "Landon? James, good to see you. My word, what happened to you? You look like you've been living under a bridge." Landon had forgotten how the beard and the longer hair and the clothes that didn't cost more than dinner would make him look to these people. Taking some personal time. Personal time. James looked him up and down like he was a specimen in a lab. "Is this some kind of breakdown? Should I be calling someone?" "I'm fine." "You don't look fine. You look like you've joined a cult." The elevator arrived. Landon stepped in, hoping James wouldn't follow. James followed. "The board's worried about you," James said as the doors closed. "You disappear for months. You're unreachable except by phone, and now you show up looking like, well, like this." "I needed space." "Space from what? Your responsibilities? Your company?" "From people who think they own me because I'm successful." James had the decency to look slightly embarrassed. "No one thinks they own you, but you have obligations, and I'm meeting them." The elevator climbed. James studied Landon in the mirrored walls. "There's a woman, isn't there?" "Excuse me?" "This is about a woman. It's always about a woman." "What? Did you meet some gold digger who's got you thinking you need to prove you're an everyman?" Landon's hands clenched. "Don't." "I'm right, aren't I?" "Who is she?" "Some social climber who—" "She doesn't know who I am," Landon said quietly. "She thinks I'm nobody, and she likes me anyway." James blinked. "You're not serious." "Completely serious." "You're pretending to be poor?" "Landon, that's insane. That's fraud, practically." "It's my life. It's a lie. And when she finds out, because she will find out, she's going to hate you for it." The elevator reached the 43rd floor. Landon stepped out without answering because James was right, and they both knew it. The board meeting was excruciating. 2 hours of questions about quarterly projections and market expansion and shareholder value, and Landon answered them all on autopilot while his mind was in a diner in Bridgeport, where a woman with shaking hands was probably getting ready for her first day of culinary school. When it finally ended, Marcus cornered him in his office. "You're distracted." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're—" Marcus stopped, studying Landon's face. "You're in love with her." Landon didn't deny it. "Does she know?" "About my feelings or about who I am?" "Both." "Neither." Marcus sat down heavily in one of the leather chairs that probably cost more than Ellie made in a month. "This is going to blow up spectacularly." "I know." "So why not just tell her? Rip the Band-Aid off, deal with the fallout." "Because I'm selfish," Landon said. "Because I want a little more time. Because every day I spend with her and Oliver feels more real than anything I've done in the last 10 years, and I'm not ready to give that up yet." "And when you don't have a choice?" Landon looked out the window at Chicago spread below him, 43 floors of distance between his real life and the one he'd built in Bridgeport. "Then I'll lose everything." He made it to the community college by 3, which was when Ellie's first class ended. He changed in his office bathroom, traded the suit for jeans and a hoodie, scrubbed away the polish that came from spending hours in boardrooms. By the time he reached the campus, he almost looked like the person Ellie thought he was. She was waiting outside the culinary building with Oliver, who must have convinced Mrs. Chen to bring him early. Ellie's face was flushed with excitement, her eyes bright, and she was talking rapidly about knife techniques and the difference between a brunoise and a julienne cut. "It was amazing," she said as Landon approached. "The instructor is this woman who trained in France, and she's terrifying but incredible. And we learned about mise en place, and she said I have good instincts, and—" She stopped, seeming to realize she was talking too fast. "Sorry, I'm babbling." "Don't apologize," Landon said. I love hearing you excited about something. Ellie smiled, and Oliver grabbed her hand, and they walked across campus together like they were already a family. Students passed them with backpacks and headphones, couples kissed on benches, someone was playing guitar near the student center. It was so normal, so mundane, and Landon felt like he was watching it all through glass. Can we show Dad your classroom? Oliver asked. If it's not locked? The classroom wasn't locked. It was industrial and clean, with stainless steel counters and professional-grade stoves and enough knives to make Landon nervous. Ellie showed him her station, explained the layout, pointed out the walk-in fridge and the storage for spices and the shelves of cookbooks that students could borrow. I'm going to learn everything, she said, running her hand over one of the counters. Every technique, every sauce, every way to make food that matters. You already make food that matters. You know what I mean. I want to be really, really good. I want to make my grandma proud. Oliver had wandered off to look at the knives, leaving Landon and Ellie standing close together in the empty classroom. The afternoon light came through the high windows, turning everything golden, and Ellie looked at him with such open happiness that Landon felt like he'd been punched. Thank you, she said softly. For what? For believing in me. For bringing Oliver here to meet me. She gestured vaguely. For showing up. No one really shows up for me except Rosie, and even she's busy most of the time. But you're always there. You and Oliver. Like you care. We do care. I care about you too. Ellie said it quickly, like she was afraid she'd lose her nerve. Both of you. I know it's only been a couple months, and that's probably too fast, and I should be more careful. But I really, really care about you. Landon should have stopped her right there. Should have said, wait, before this goes any further, there's something you need to know. Should have been honest. Instead, he said, I care about you too. Ellie's smile could have lit the whole building. Yeah? Yeah. So we're, what, dating? If you want to be. I want to be. And then she kissed him, just a soft press of her lips against his, tentative and sweet and tasting slightly of the vanilla chapstick she kept in her apron pocket. Landon kissed her back, gentle and careful, aware of Oliver somewhere behind them probably watching, aware that this was the moment where everything became infinitely more complicated. When they pulled apart, Ellie was blushing. Sorry, was that too forward? That was perfect. Oliver chose that moment to announce he'd found a knife that was as big as a sword, and could he have one for home, which broke the tension and made them all laugh. They left the culinary building as the sun was setting, painting the campus in shades of orange and red, and Landon held Ellie's hand and felt like he was simultaneously winning and losing everything. Dinner was at a pizza place near the campus, the kind with checkered tablecloths and a jukebox playing Motown. Oliver ate 3 slices and fell asleep in the booth, his head on Ellie's shoulder, and Landon watched them and thought about James Carmichael's warning. She will find out, and she will hate you for it. What are you thinking about? Ellie asked, stroking Oliver's hair absently. How good this is. It is good, isn't it? She smiled. I keep waiting for something to go wrong. That's terrible, right? But I'm not used to things working out. Nothing's going to go wrong. Famous last words. The next week was stolen time. Landon made excuses to his CFO, delegated everything he could, and spent every possible moment in Bridgeport. He and Ellie fell into a rhythm that felt like playing house. Dinners at her apartment, which was smaller than his but filled with her grandmother's things and pictures, and the smell of whatever she was testing from class. Movie nights where Oliver fell asleep between them on the couch. Walks through the neighborhood where Ellie pointed out her favorite spots and introduced him to the bodega owner who'd known her since she was a kid. Ellie cooked for them constantly, trying new recipes, asking for honest feedback. She made coq au vin and beef bourguignon and a cassoulet that took 2 days and made the whole building smell like heaven. She taught Oliver to make fresh pasta, the two of them covered in flour, laughing when the dough wouldn't cooperate. She brought them leftovers from Rosie's and showed Landon how to properly sear a steak and explained the science of emulsification while making hollandaise. She was brilliant and passionate and completely in her element, and Landon fell harder with every burned dinner and perfectly risen soufflé. But the lie sat between them like a landmine. Landon almost told her a dozen times. When she asked about his childhood, and he had to edit out the boarding schools and country clubs. When she mentioned money problems, and he had to bite his tongue to keep from offering to solve them. When Oliver almost called Mrs. Chenna my nanny instead of Dad's friend, and Landon had to redirect the conversation. The closest he came was one night when Ellie was washing dishes in her tiny kitchen and Landon was drying, Oliver asleep on her couch with a blanket tucked around him. "Can I ask you something?" Ellie said. "Anything." "What did you do? Before? When your wife was alive?" Landon's hand stilled on the dish he was drying. "Why do you ask?" "I don't know. You just seem... You know things. About wine and art... art and places I've never been. And sometimes you talk like someone who had money once. This was it. The opening. The chance to come clean." "I worked in tech," Landon said, which was true. "Made decent money for a while." "What happened?" "After Caroline died, I couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't focus, couldn't care about code and products and quarterly earnings when my kid was asking why his mom wasn't coming home." Also true, mostly. "So I walked away." Ellie put down the dish she was washing and turned to face him, her hands still wet. "That must have been really hard." "It was the right choice." "Do you miss it? The money?" "No," Landon said and meant it. "I miss Caroline. But the money? The career? That all feels like someone else's life." Ellie studied his face like she was looking for cracks in the story. Landon held still and tried not to blink. Finally, she said, "I'm glad you walked away. Because if you hadn't, you wouldn't have ended up at Rosie's. Best decision I ever made." She kissed him then, right there in her tiny kitchen, with dish soap on her hands and her hair falling out of its ponytail. And Landon kissed her back and hated himself for being too much of a coward to tell the truth. The bomb dropped on a Friday in late November, 3 weeks before Christmas, and 2 months after Landon had first walked into Rosie's diner. Ellie had mentioned a cooking competition being held downtown, the Chicago Home Chef Challenge, an annual event where amateur cooks competed for a prize package that included cash, kitchen equipment, and a feature in a local food magazine. She'd been wanting to enter for years but had never had the confidence or the entry fee. "You should do it," Landon had said. "The entry fee is $300. I don't have that kind of money lying around. What if you did?" "Then I'd spend it on something practical, like my nephew's asthma medication or the leak in my bathroom ceiling." Landon had made a note. $300 was nothing to him, less than nothing. He spent more than that on coffee in a month back when he was living the penthouse life. But to Ellie, it was groceries for 2 months, a car repair she'd been putting off, a cushion against the constant anxiety of living paycheck to paycheck. So he'd done what he was getting too good at. He'd fixed it secretly. He'd had Marcus wire money to the competition's scholarship fund with instructions that it be used to waive entry fees for qualified applicants who showed financial need. He'd made sure Ellie's name was at the top of the list. He'd arranged for a package of professional cooking equipment to be donated to participants who made it past the first round. It was all anonymous, all untraceable, all completely dishonest. The letter came to Rosie's again, and Landon watched Ellie open it with the same mix of pride and guilt he'd felt with the culinary school scholarship. "I got in," Ellie said, her voice shaking. "They waived the fee. They said I was selected for their financial assistance program because of my essay and my background and..." She looked at Landon with wet eyes. "I'm going to compete. I'm actually going to do this." Rosie whooped. Oliver cheered. Landon smiled and ignored the sick feeling in his stomach. The competition was scheduled for a Saturday in mid-December. Ellie spent every spare moment practicing, testing recipes, asking Landon and Oliver to taste everything and be brutally honest. She'd decided to make her grandmother's banana cream pie and a savory dish she was still perfecting, some kind of short rib situation that required braising and reduction and precision timing. "You're going to win," Oliver said confidently. "There's going to be like 50 other people, buddy. You're still going to win." She didn't win. She came in third, which was better than anyone expected, and earned her a feature in the magazine and a set of professional knives that made her cry when she opened the box. The winner was a retired chef who'd been cooking for 40 years. The second-place finisher had trained at Le Cordon Bleu, but Ellie had held her own. She'd stood in front of judges and presented her food with confidence Landon had never seen from her before. She talked about her grandmother's legacy and her own dreams and what cooking meant to her, and she hadn't apologized once. Afterward, there was a small reception for all the participants. Punch and cookies, people mingling and congratulating each other, a photographer from the magazine taking pictures. Ellie was glowing, accepting compliments from other competitors, showing Oliver her knives, talking to Landon about what she'd learned and what she'd do differently next time. Landon was watching her, feeling something dangerously close to contentment, when someone called his name. Not "Hey you," or "Excuse me," or any generic greeting. Landon Pierce? He turned. It was one of his former employees, Greg something, had worked in marketing, had been at the company Christmas party last year. Greg was standing with a woman who must be his wife, both of them dressed for a nice dinner downtown, probably just passing through the hotel where the competition had been held. "Greg," Landon said, trying to keep his voice neutral. "Good to see you." "Man, I almost didn't recognize you. What's with the—" Greg gestured at Landon's jeans and flannel shirt and general air of not being a billionaire CEO. "New look? Taking some time off. I heard you were on sabbatical, but I didn't know you were going full lumberjack." Greg laughed, loud and oblivious. "Hey, did you hear Morrison's retiring? Board's going crazy trying to figure out succession planning. Everyone's wondering when you're coming back." Landon was aware of Ellie approaching, drawn by the sound of her name being used in the same sentence as Pierce Industries and board and succession planning. "Come back from what?" Ellie asked. Greg turned, still smiling. "From his company. Pierce Industries? You must know about it if you know Landon." Ellie looked at Landon, then at Greg, then back at Landon. "Pierce Industries. Yeah, he's the CEO. Or was, I guess, before he decided to go all into the wild on us." Greg was still laughing, still completely unaware of what he was doing. "Though I gotta say, I didn't peg you for the cooking competition type. Supporting a friend?" "Something like that," Landon said quietly. Ellie's face had gone very pale. "You're the CEO of Pierce Industries." It wasn't a question. "Ellie, the Pierce Industries, the tech company, the one that's worth—" She stopped, seemed to do math in her head. "Billions." Greg finally caught on that something was wrong. "Wait, you didn't know?" Ellie took a step back. "I need some air." She turned and walked toward the doors, not running but moving fast enough that Landon knew she wasn't planning to come back. Oliver was standing with Rosie, who'd come to the competition to cheer Ellie on, and both of them were watching with confused expressions. Landon followed Ellie outside. The December cold hit him like a slap, wind off Lake Michigan cutting through his flannel shirt. Ellie was standing on the sidewalk, arms wrapped around herself, staring at nothing. "Ellie, don't. Please let me explain." She laughed, sharp and bitter and nothing like her usual soft voice. "Explain what? That you've been lying to me for 3 months? That everything I thought I knew about you is fake?" "Not everything." "Really? So you are a struggling single dad who used to work in tech and had to walk away because you couldn't handle it?" She turned to face him, and her eyes were dry but furious. "Or are you actually a billionaire who was just slumming it in Bridgeport for fun?" "It wasn't for fun. It was—" "What? Some kind of social experiment? Were you studying how the poor people live, taking notes for your next board meeting?" "I was looking for someone real." "Someone real?" Ellie's voice cracked. "You were looking for someone real by being completely fake." "I wanted to find someone who would care about Oliver without knowing about the money. Someone who would love him for who he is." "So you lied to me. You let me believe—" She stopped, pressed her hands against her face. "I told you things, private things. I cried in front of you about not being able to afford culinary school, about struggling to make rent, about all the things I couldn't have. And the whole time you could have— Could have what? Thrown money at you? Made you feel like a charity case? You made me feel like an idiot instead. That wasn't my intention. I don't care about your intentions." Ellie's hands were shaking worse than Landon had ever seen them. "I care that you looked me in the eye and lied. Every day. For months. I didn't lie about my feelings. How am I supposed to believe anything you say now?" Landon didn't have an answer for that. Behind them, the hotel doors opened and Oliver came running out, Rosie following more slowly. "Dad? Miss Ellie? What's wrong?" Ellie looked at Oliver and something in her expression crumpled. "I'm sorry, sweetie. I have to go." But we were going to celebrate. You won the knives. I know. I can't right now. She kissed the top of Oliver's head, quick and gentle, and then she was walking away down the sidewalk, her competition certificate still clutched in one hand, disappearing into the Chicago night. Oliver looked up at Landon with betrayal written across his small face. You told her. Someone else told her. But you were supposed to tell her first. You were supposed to explain so she'd understand. Rosie arrived, slightly out of breath. What in the hell just happened? Landon watched Ellie's figure get smaller in the distance. I ruined everything. Damn right you did, Rosie said. What were you thinking? I was thinking I could find someone who'd love my son without seeing dollar signs. And you found her. Ellie doesn't care about money. She cares about people. She cares about you. Rosie shook her head. Did care about you. Past tense now, probably. Oliver started crying, quiet tears that hurt worse than screaming. I want Miss Ellie. I know, buddy. Fix it. I don't know if I can. But he had to try. Because Oliver was right. Ellie was perfect for them, and Landon had found exactly what he was looking for and then destroyed it with the same lie that was supposed to protect it. He just had no idea how to put it back together. The Bridgeport apartment felt like a tomb. Landon stood in the living room where he'd played cards with Oliver on the floor, where they'd eaten pizza straight from the box, where Ellie had taught his son to fold napkins into swans. Now it just felt empty, all the lightness sucked out of it, leaving behind the truth that this had always been temporary. A set piece. A lie with furniture. Oliver hadn't spoken to him since they'd gotten home. He'd gone straight to his room, shut the door, and Landon could hear him crying through the thin walls. Mrs. Chen had arrived within the hour. Landon had called her from the street outside the hotel, and she'd tried to comfort Oliver, but even she looked at Landon with something like disappointment. What were you thinking? She asked, standing in the doorway of the apartment like she wasn't sure she should come all the way in. I was thinking I could protect him. From what? From having a mother who actually cared about him? Mrs. Chen shook her head. That girl loved him, loved both of you, and you threw it away. I didn't throw anything away. Someone else. Don't. Her voice was sharp. Don't blame this on Greg or whoever recognized you. This was always going to happen. You built a house on sand and you're surprised it fell down. She was right. Of course she was right. Landon had known from the beginning that this would end badly. He just convinced himself he could control the timing, manage the fallout, somehow make Ellie understand that the lie was necessary because the truth would have ruined everything before it started. Except the lie had ruined everything anyway. Mrs. Chen went to check on Oliver, and Landon stood alone in his fake living room and called Marcus. It's over, he said when his CFO picked up. What's over? The experiment. The disguise. All of it. She knows. There was a pause. Then, how'd she take it? How do you think? Yeah, Marcus sighed. I'm sorry, man. I really am. What are you going to do? I don't know. You could try apologizing. I did. She didn't want to hear it. Give her time then. Let her cool off, process it. Maybe she won't. Landon sat down on the second-hand couch that had seemed charming 3 months ago and now just seemed sad. You didn't see her face. She looked at me like I was a stranger, like everything we had was poison. Was it? What? Was it poison? Or was some of it real? Landon thought about Ellie laughing at Oliver's dinosaur impressions. Ellie teaching them to make fresh pasta, flour in her hair. Ellie kissing him in the culinary classroom with the sunset coming through the windows. It felt real. Then maybe there's still something to save. I don't think so. But the next morning, Landon went to Rosie's anyway. He showed up at 6 when he knew Ellie would be there for the breakfast shift, before the diner got crowded, when maybe he could talk to her without an audience. He'd rehearsed what to say all night, had written and discarded a dozen different speeches, had finally settled on just being honest and hoping that counted for something. Ellie was behind the counter when he walked in, and she went rigid the moment she saw him. We're not doing this here, she said. I just want to talk. I don't care what you want. Rosie emerged from the kitchen, took one look at the situation, and jerked her head toward the back. Office, now, both of you. Rosie's office was barely bigger than a closet, crammed with filing cabinets and invoices and a desk covered in papers. She pointed at two folding chairs and said, "Sit." They sat. Rosie stood with her arms crossed, looking between them like a referee. "All right, Ellie, he's an ass. We've established that. But he's also clearly miserable. And you're clearly miserable, and I'm tired of watching two people who care about each other suffer because they're both too stubborn to actually talk. So talk." "There's nothing to say," Ellie said. "Bull. There's plenty to say." Rosie looked at Landon. "You first. Explain yourself." Landon took a breath. 2 years ago, my wife died. Brain aneurysm, no warning. One day she was there and the next she wasn't. And Oliver was 3, and he didn't understand why Mommy wasn't coming home. And I didn't know how to help him because I was barely holding it together myself." Ellie's expression didn't soften, but she didn't interrupt either. "I tried to move on, tried dating, but every woman I met knew who I was before they knew anything else about me. They knew the money, the company, the lifestyle, and some of them were interested in Oliver, but it always felt," Landon searched for the right word, "transactional, like they were auditioning for a role instead of actually caring about a kid who needed a mom." "So you decided to lie about who you were," Ellie said flatly. "I decided to find out if someone could care about us without all the other noise. I wanted to know if there was someone out there who would love Oliver for who he is, not for what he comes with. And you found that person. Congratulations. Must be nice to know your experiment worked." The bitterness in her voice cut deep. "It wasn't an experiment. Or it started that way, but it became—" "What? Real?" Ellie laughed, sharp and humorless. "Nothing about this was real. You were playing dress-up, pretending to struggle while I actually struggled. Do you know how that feels? To have told you about being unable to afford things, about worrying about rent and medical bills and whether I'd ever be able to go to culinary school, and the whole time you could have solved all of it with pocket change. Would you have wanted me to? That's not the point. It is the point. If I'd shown up as Landon Pierce, billionaire, and offered to pay for your school, what would you have said?" Ellie opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I would have said no." "Exactly. You would have seen it as charity, as pity. You would have felt like I was trying to buy you. Instead, you just lied to me for 3 months. So much better." Rosie held up a hand. "Ellie, let him finish." Ellie crossed her arms but stayed quiet. Landon continued. "I know I should have told you sooner. I knew it the whole time. Every day I didn't tell you. It got harder, because every day I fell more in love with you, and the idea of losing you became unbearable. So I kept putting it off, kept telling myself I'd find the right moment, and then there was no right moment because they'd all passed." "You love me," Ellie said, and her voice shook slightly. "Yes." "How am I supposed to believe that?" "I don't know, but it's true. I love that you remember how customers take their coffee. I love that you make pie the way your grandmother taught you. I love that you treat Oliver like he's the most important person in the room. I love your shaking hands and your quiet voice and the way you apologize for things that aren't your fault." Landon's throat was tight. "I love you, and I ruined everything because I was too much of a coward to be honest." Silence filled the tiny office. Rosie looked between them, then quietly slipped out, closing the door behind her. Ellie wiped at her eyes angrily. "You don't get to make me cry." "I'm sorry." "Stop apologizing. It doesn't fix anything." "I know." She stood up, paced the 3 steps the office allowed, turned back. "The scholarship, the competition fee. Those were you, weren't they?" It wasn't a question, but Landon nodded anyway. "So even the good things were lies." "They weren't lies. You earned that scholarship. You deserved to be in that competition. I just removed obstacles. Without asking me. Without giving me a choice. Because you would have said no." "Yes!" Ellie's voice rose. "I would have said no because I don't want to be someone's charity project. I don't want to be the poor waitress that some rich guy decided to save. I wanted to earn it myself, to know that I got somewhere because I was good enough, not because someone pulled strings behind my back." "You're good enough. You placed 3rd against people who've been cooking professionally for years. You did that, not me. But I'll never know that for sure now, will I? I'll always wonder if the judges were told to go easy on me, if the scholarship committee was nudged in my direction, if any of it was actually real." Landon hadn't thought about it that way, hadn't considered that his help might feel like theft instead of generosity. I'm sorry. Stop saying that. What do you want me to say? Ellie sat back down, suddenly looking exhausted. I don't know. Maybe there's nothing you can say. Maybe this is just... She made a helpless gesture. Broken. It doesn't have to be. Landon. Said his name like it hurt. You lied to me about everything. Who you are, where you live, what you do, how much money you have. You let me cook you cheap dinners in my crappy apartment while you probably own half of downtown Chicago. You watched me stress about bills you could pay without thinking. You made me fall in love with someone who doesn't exist. I exist. The person you fell in love with is me. No, he's not. He's some character you created. The real you lives in a penthouse and goes to board meetings and has people who do things for him. The real you would never actually be with someone like me. That stopped Landon cold. You think I'm slumming, aren't you? No, I left that life because it was killing me. The penthouse was empty. The board meetings were meaningless. I had everything anyone could want, and I was miserable. He leaned forward, trying to make her understand. These last 3 months in that tiny apartment with Oliver, eating pizza on the floor and going to your place for dinner and spending time at the diner, that's the happiest I've been since Caroline died. That's real. That matters. Because you chose it, Ellie said quietly. You gotta play it being normal because you knew you could go back any time. But this is my actual life. I don't get to opt out when it stops being fun. She was right again, and Landon had no defense. I need time, Ellie said finally. I need to think about this without you sitting here looking at me like that. Like what? Like I'm the only thing in the world that matters. It's not fair. Landon stood. Okay, take all the time you need, but Ellie, don't. Oliver misses you. He asked for you all night. Her face crumpled. That's really not fair. I know, but it's true. He left before she could respond, before he could make things worse, before he could see her crying and lose whatever resolve he had left to give her space. Outside, Chicago was waking up, people heading to work, buses running, the city moving forward like nothing had changed. Landon walked back to the Bridgeport apartment and found Oliver awake, sitting on the couch with his stuffed elephant. Did you fix it? Oliver asked. Not yet. Are you going to? I'm going to try. Oliver considered this. What if she doesn't forgive you? Then I'll have to live with that. But what about me? I need her. Landon sat down next to his son, pulled him close. I know you do, buddy, and if there's any way to make this right, I'm going to find it. But some things take time. How much time? I don't know. Oliver was quiet for a moment. Then, we should go back to the big apartment. What? If she doesn't want to see you because you lied, then maybe you should stop lying. Be who you really are. Out of the mouths of children. You're very smart. You know that? Mrs. Chen says that too. Over the next week, Landon did something he'd been avoiding. He started being himself again. Not completely, not overnight, but in degrees. He went back to Pierce Industries for real, not just for meetings, but to actually run the company. He moved back to the penthouse, which felt cavernous and sterile after the Bridgeport apartment, but was at least honest. He stopped hiding. The board was relieved. His CFO was confused but supportive. Mrs. Chen moved back into her usual role, though she still looked at Landon like he'd disappointed her. And Oliver adjusted the way kids do, bouncing back and forth between the two lives like a tourist in his own existence. He liked the penthouse's game room and the view from his bedroom window. But he also asked about Rosie's diner every day, about whether they could go back, about when he'd see Miss Ellie again. Landon didn't have answers. He tried giving Ellie space. A week passed, then 2. He sent flowers once, which she returned with a note that said, "Please don't." He tried calling, but she didn't pick up. He thought about showing up at the diner, but couldn't bring himself to corner her at work. Instead, he wrote a letter. It took him 3 days and a dozen drafts. He wrote it longhand, on real paper, because typing it felt too impersonal. He told her everything, about Caroline's death, and his loneliness, and the plan that had seemed brilliant in his grief-soaked desperation. about falling for her slowly and then all at once, about Oliver's drawings with people missing, about how the lie had started as protection and become a prison. He told her about the first time she'd smiled at him, how it had felt like light in a dark room, about watching her teach Oliver to fold napkins and feeling hope for the first time in years, about the moment in the culinary classroom when she'd kissed him and he'd known he was completely, irrevocably in love. He apologized without making excuses. He told her he understood if she couldn't forgive him, that he didn't deserve forgiveness, that he'd spend the rest of his life regretting the way he'd handled this. And then he told her the truth he'd been avoiding even in his own head, that he'd used the disguise to test her, and in doing so, he'd failed his own test. Because real love wasn't about finding someone who passed some artificial challenge. It was about being vulnerable enough to be seen completely and choosing to trust anyway. He demanded honesty from her while giving her lies, and that made him a hypocrite at best and cruel at worst. He ended the letter with a promise that he wouldn't contact her again unless she wanted him to, that she deserved better than someone who hid behind false identities and secret scholarships, that he hoped someday she might understand why he'd done what he did, even if she never forgave him for it. He mailed the letter and tried to move on. Moving on was impossible. Everywhere Landon looked, he saw Ellie, the coffee he couldn't make right, the banana cream pie Oliver had loved from the bakery downstairs, but that wasn't made with her grandmother's recipe, the empty space where her laughter should be. Oliver was worse. He'd stopped drawing entirely. Mrs. Chen said he'd been asking the school counselor questions about what happened when people you loved went away. He was too young to articulate what he was feeling, but Landon saw it in the way his son moved through the penthouse like a ghost, touching expensive things without interest, asking when they could go back to the small apartment where Miss Ellie visited. She didn't visit there, Landon tried to explain. That wasn't our real home. It felt real, Oliver said, and Landon had no argument. 3 weeks after the competition, Rosie called him. "You need to stop sending food," she said without preamble. "What?" "The catering. From your fancy restaurants downtown. It shows up twice a week with notes that say, 'For the staff at Rosie's.' I know it's you." Landon had been doing that, actually, anonymously sending food from the high-end places he'd invested in, thinking maybe Ellie would enjoy trying dishes she'd never had access to. "I just thought, you thought wrong. She knows it's you and it's making her upset. Stop." "How is she?" "How do you think?" "She's heartbroken and angry and confused, and she's throwing herself into her classes like they're the only thing keeping her together, which they might be." "Is she eating? Sleeping?" "Landon, you don't get to care about that anymore." "I'll always care about that." Rosie sighed, heavy and tired. "Look, I called because I need you to understand something. Ellie's been hurt before. I don't know all the details because she doesn't talk about it, but I know her dad left when she was a kid and her mom died, and her grandmother worked herself to death trying to keep them afloat. She spent her whole life being invisible to people who had more than her. And then you showed up, and for the first time someone actually saw her. Someone cared. Someone made her feel like she mattered. She does matter. But you still lied to her. You still made her feel like the person she fell for was just an act. And that cuts deeper than you realize." Landon closed his eyes. "What can I do?" "Nothing, or everything. I don't know, but the fancy food isn't helping." She hung up before he could respond. That night, Landon did something he hadn't done in weeks. He went to the penthouse's wine cellar, poured himself 3 fingers of scotch that cost more than Ellie made in a week, and drank it while staring out at Chicago sparkling below him. He thought about Rosie's words, about Ellie feeling invisible, about her finally being seen and then finding out it was all performance. The thing was, it hadn't been performance. Not by the end. Maybe not ever. Landon had been more himself in that Bridgeport apartment than he'd ever been in the penthouse. The clothes and the neighborhood had been fake, but the feelings weren't. The time with Oliver wasn't. The love he'd developed for a shy waitress with shaking hands and a grandmother's pie recipe wasn't. But how could he prove that to someone who'd learned not to trust pretty words and empty promises? The answer came from an unexpected place. Oliver had started seeing a child psychologist. Not because Landon wanted to, but because the school counselor had strongly suggested it after Oliver told her he'd lost his almost mom. The psychologist, Dr. Sarah Kim, called Landon in for a family session a month after the breakup. Oliver's been talking about Ellie, Dr. Kim said, once they were settled in her office with its soft chairs and strategically placed tissue boxes. He's very attached to her. I know. He's also very angry with you. Oliver, sitting in the chair next to Landon, didn't deny it. I understand, Landon said. Dr. Kim studied him. Do you? Because from what Oliver's told me, you created an elaborate deception to test whether someone was worthy of your family. And when you found someone who was, you continued the deception until it blew up in your face. Does that sound accurate? When you put it that way, it sounds terrible. How would you put it? Landon looked at Oliver, who was staring at his shoes. I was trying to protect my son from people who would use him to get to my money. By lying to someone who would never have done that. I didn't know that when I started. But you knew it eventually, and you still didn't come clean. Landon had no defense. You're right. Dr. Kim leaned forward. Here's what I'm seeing. You experienced a profound loss when your wife died. You were scared of being hurt again, scared of Oliver being hurt again. So you created a scenario where you had all the control. You could observe, you could test, you could pull the plug anytime things got too real. Except they got real anyway, and you lost control. And now you're dealing with the consequences of treating another person's feelings like a variable in an experiment. I never meant to hurt her, but you did. And more importantly, you hurt Oliver by letting him get attached to someone you were lying to. He lost his mother. Then he lost Ellie. And both times, he had no control over it. Oliver's chin was wobbling. Landon wanted to pull him into a hug, but wasn't sure he had the right. What do I do? Landon asked. That depends. What do you want? I want Ellie back. I want Oliver to be happy. I want to not feel like I've destroyed the best thing that's happened to us in years. Then you need to be honest. Not strategically honest. Not calculating what information to share to get the outcome you want. Actually honest. Vulnerable. Which I suspect is terrifying for you. It was terrifying. Landon had built an empire on being 3 steps ahead, on never showing weakness, on maintaining control. The idea of laying himself open to rejection, to Ellie looking at him and saying, "No, you hurt me too much. There's no coming back from this." That was worse than any business failure he'd ever faced. But Dr. Kim was right, and Oliver deserved better than a father who hid behind strategies and plans. Okay, Landon said. I'll be honest. Not with me, Dr. Kim said. With her. That night, Landon sat down and wrote another letter. Not calculated, not edited to perfection, just honest. He told Ellie that he was scared, that the idea of someone loving him for his money instead of himself had paralyzed him after Caroline died, that he'd convinced himself the disguise was about protecting Oliver when really it was about protecting himself. He told her about the first board meeting he'd attended after falling for her, how he'd sat there in his expensive suit listening to people talk about market share, and all he could think about was whether she was having a good day at the diner. About how the penthouse had started to feel like a museum of a life he didn't want anymore. He told her that he understood if she couldn't forgive him, that he wouldn't blame her, that she deserved someone who was brave enough to be honest from the start. But he also told her that he'd never felt more himself than when he was with her. That the man who'd sat in her kitchen learning to make pasta was more real than the CEO in the boardroom. That choosing her, and he was choosing her, completely, if she'd have him, meant choosing the version of himself he actually wanted to be. He ended by saying he wasn't asking for another chance. He was just telling her the truth, finally, because she deserved that much. He mailed the letter and felt like he'd jumped off a building. 2 days later, on a Thursday evening in mid-December, there was a knock on the penthouse door. Landon answered it to find Ellie standing in the hallway, wearing her coat and looking nervous and holding both letters he'd sent. "Hi," she said. "Hi. Can I come in?" Landon stepped aside. Ellie walked into the penthouse and stopped, taking in the view, the expensive furniture, the art on the walls, all the wealth that Landon had been hiding. Her expression was unreadable. "This is where you really live," she said. "Yes. Wow. It's empty." She turned to look at him. "Your letters. You don't have to respond. I just wanted you to know." "Landon, stop. Let me talk." He stopped. Ellie took a breath. "I've been so angry. For weeks, I've been furious at you for lying, for manipulating the situation, for making me feel stupid, and I had a right to be angry. You did lie. You did manipulate things. I know, but she held up the letters. I've also been reading these over and over, and I talked to Rosie, and I talked to my therapist. Yes, I started seeing a therapist because of this whole mess, and I've been trying to figure out if there's any way past this. Landon's heart was beating so hard he could feel it in his throat. And I don't know, because here's the thing. The person I fell in love with, the guy who brought his kid to the diner and asked about my day and ate my experimental recipes and made me feel seen, that person felt real to me. But was he? Yes, everything I felt was real. The way I looked at you, the way I cared about you and Oliver together, the way I fell in love with you, none of that was fake. But the circumstances were. And that matters. I know it matters. Ellie walked to the window, looked out at the city. When I was growing up, my grandmother used to say that people show you who they are when they think no one's watching. And I thought I was seeing the real you in those moments. When you were patient with Oliver, when you listened to me talk about my dreams, when you didn't make me feel small. But you were watching the whole time. You were testing me. Not by the end. By the end, I was just there, with you, wanting to be with you. But I'll never know for sure when it stopped being a test and started being real. Landon crossed the room to stand near her, not touching, but close. December 3rd. What? You asked when it stopped being a test. December 3rd. We were at your apartment and you were teaching Oliver to make whipped cream by hand, and he got it everywhere, and you were laughing, and I looked at you and thought, I love her. Not, she's good with my kid, or she passes the test. Just, I love her. Ellie's eyes filled with tears. You remember the exact date. I remember everything about that night. You were wearing a red sweater with a hole in the sleeve. You'd burned the first batch of cookies and made Oliver promise not to tell Rosie. You had flour in your hair, and I knew I was in too deep, that I should tell you the truth, but I was terrified of losing you. So you lied for 2 more weeks. Yes, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Ellie wiped at her eyes. I want to believe you. I want to believe that what we had was real. But Landon, how do I trust you? How do I know you won't lie to me again when it's convenient? You don't. I can't prove it. I can only tell you that I will spend the rest of my life being honest with you about everything, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it would be easier to hide. The rest of your life is a long time. I know. I'm just a waitress with big dreams and a tiny apartment. You're this. She gestured at the penthouse. This is your real life, private jets and board meetings and wealth I can't even imagine. How would that even work? However you want it to work. I'll sell the penthouse, move to Bridgeport for real. I'll step back from the company, spend more time with you and Oliver. Or we can live here and you can have your own space, and we'll figure it out together. I don't care about the logistics. I just care about you. Ellie shook her head. You can't sell the penthouse. You can't walk away from your company. That's not a solution. That's you trying to prove something by making grand gestures. Then what do you want? I want honesty, real honesty. I want you to be yourself, the billionaire CEO yourself, and let me decide if I can love that person too. Because I fell for the guy in the Bridgeport apartment, but that was only part of you, and I need to know if the whole you is someone I can be with. It was fair. It was more than fair. It was also terrifying in a way that corporate takeovers and hostile boards had never been. Okay, Landon said. Ask me anything. No more hiding. Ellie looked at him for a long moment, considering. Then she said, Where's Oliver? In his room. Why? Because if I'm going to figure this out, I need to see him. I miss him. And just like that, Landon felt the first crack of light in weeks of darkness. Oliver's room in the penthouse was nothing like his room in the Bridgeport apartment. Here he had wall-to-wall bookshelves, a bed shaped like a race car that he'd stopped sleeping in because it felt too big, and a window that overlooked the entire city. Landon found him sitting on the floor with his stuffed elephant, building something elaborate out of blocks that looked more like a fortress than anything playful. Buddy, someone's here to see you. Oliver didn't look up. I don't want to see anyone. Not even Miss Ellie? The blocks clattered as Oliver dropped them. He turned around so fast he almost fell over, his eyes going wide. She's here? In the living room. Oliver scrambled to his feet and ran past Landon before he could say anything else. Landon followed more slowly, giving them space but needing to see this, needing to know if the damage he'd done could somehow be repaired. He found them in the middle of the living room, Oliver wrapped around Ellie like she was the only solid thing in the world, his face buried in her coat. Ellie was crying again, holding Oliver just as tightly, and Landon stayed in the doorway watching them piece themselves back together. "I missed you so much," Oliver said, his voice muffled. "I thought you were gone forever." "I missed you too, sweetheart." "Are you still mad at Dad?" Ellie glanced at Landon over Oliver's head. "I'm working on it." "Does that mean you're staying?" "I don't know yet. We have to talk about some things." Oliver pulled back enough to look at her face. "Grown-up things?" "Yeah. Those are always complicated." "They really are." Oliver seemed to accept this. He grabbed Ellie's hand and started pulling her toward his room. "Come see my new space. It's bigger, but I don't like it as much as the old one. The walls are too far apart." Ellie let herself be led, and Landon followed them into Oliver's room. She looked around at all the expensive things, the custom furniture, the organized shelves, the toys that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and her expression was hard to read. "This is where you really live," she said, echoing what she'd said about the penthouse. "I like the other apartment better," Oliver said. "It was small, but it felt like home. This feels like a museum." Ellie sat down on the floor next to Oliver's block fortress. "What are you building?" "A castle with really high walls so bad things can't get in." The metaphor wasn't lost on anyone. Ellie ran her hand over the blocks, careful not to disturb them. "Sometimes high walls keep good things out too." "I know, but it's safer this way." "Is it?" Oliver thought about this. "I don't know anymore." Landon watched them talk, watched the easy way they fell back into conversation, and felt something loosen in his chest. Maybe this wasn't completely destroyed. Maybe there was still a chance. After a while, Mrs. Chen appeared with hot chocolate and cookies, giving Ellie a warm hug that made it clear where her loyalties lay. She settled Oliver with a book and a pointed look that said, "Give them privacy," and then she disappeared back into whatever part of the penthouse she'd claimed as her territory. Ellie and Landon ended up in the kitchen, which was all marble and stainless steel and appliances that cost more than cars. Ellie touched the countertop like she was afraid it might bite. "This is surreal," she said. "It's just a kitchen." "It's a kitchen that probably has its own zip code." Landon almost smiled. "It's excessive, I know." "Did you cook here when you lived here before?" "Sometimes. Mostly I had a private chef." Ellie flinched. "Right, of course you did." "I fired him after I moved to Bridgeport. It felt wrong to have someone else cook for us when I was trying to—" He stopped. "When you were trying to pretend to be normal?" "Yeah." Ellie leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "So what happens now? You hired him back?" "No. Mrs. Chen cooks when she's here, or we order in, or I make pasta that's never as good as yours." "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Say things that are designed to make me soften toward you." "I'm not. That's just the truth. Your pasta is better." "Landon." He held up his hands in surrender. "Okay, I'm sorry. What do you want to talk about?" Ellie took a breath. "Everything. I want to know about your life, the real one, not the sanitized version you gave me in the diner." "All right. Tell me about your wife." That wasn't what Landon expected. "Caroline?" "Yes. You said she died 2 years ago, but you never really talked about her. Who was she?" Landon pulled out one of the bar stools, gestured for Ellie to sit. She did, perching on the edge like she might need to run. He sat across from her and tried to figure out where to start. "We met in college. She was pre-med. I was in computer science. We had a philosophy class together, and she thought my arguments were terrible." "Were they?" "Probably. I was 20 and thought I knew everything." Landon smiled at the memory. "She was smarter than me, kinder than me, better at reading people. She kept me grounded when I started the company, reminded me there were more important things than quarterly earnings." "Did you love her?" "Yes. Not the same way I love you, but yes." Ellie's expression flickered. "Different how?" "We were kids when we got together. We grew up together, built a life together. It was comfortable and good and exactly what I needed at the time. But we argued a lot about work, about priorities, about whether I was spending too much time at the office. She wanted me to slow down, to be more present, and I kept thinking there'd be time for that later. But there wasn't. No, she had a brain aneurysm while she was grocery shopping. Just collapsed in the middle of the produce section. They said she was probably dead before she hit the floor. Ellie's hand moved across the counter, not quite touching his, but close. I'm sorry. I blame myself for a long time. For all the dinners I'd missed, all the times I'd chosen work over her, all the ways I'd taken her for granted. Is that why you walked away from everything? With Oliver? Partly. I also couldn't stand being in our house anymore, seeing all the places she should have been. And Oliver kept asking for her, and I didn't know how to help him, and I was drowning. So you created a different life. Yes. Ellie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Tell me about the company. What do you actually do? We make enterprise software, database management, security systems, cloud infrastructure. It's incredibly boring unless you're a tech person. But you're good at it. I built it from nothing to a company worth billions, so I guess I'm decent. That's not decent. Landon, that's extraordinary. He shrugged. It's just work. No, it's not. Stop diminishing yourself. Ellie leaned forward. This is what I mean about honesty. You tell me it's just work, but you're brilliant at it. You created something massive. That's part of who you are, and you can't just pretend it doesn't matter because you think I'll be intimidated. Are you? Intimidated? Terrified, actually, but not because you're successful, because I don't know how I fit into that world. You don't have to fit into it. You can be completely separate from it if you want. But that's not realistic, is it? If we're together, your world becomes my world in some way. People will have opinions about me, about us. They'll assume things. Let them assume. Easy for you to say. You're used to people having opinions about you. Landon reached across the counter, stopped just short of taking her hand. What are you afraid of? Ellie looked at him, really looked at him, and her eyes were wet again. I'm afraid of not being enough, of people looking at us and wondering what you're doing with some waitress from Bridgeport, of you realizing that I don't belong in your world and getting bored. That's never going to happen. You don't know that. I do. Because the world you're talking about, the galas and the society pages and the people who care about status, I hate that world. I've always hated it. Caroline hated it too. We used to skip events and hide in our apartment and pretend we were normal people. But you're not normal people. You're this. She gestured at the penthouse again. The penthouse doesn't define me. The money doesn't define me. This is just stuff, Ellie. It doesn't mean anything. It means something to people who don't have it. You're right. I'm sorry. That was exactly the kind of thing rich people say when they don't understand. Ellie almost smiled. At least you caught yourself. They sat in silence for a moment, and Landon felt the weight of all the conversations they needed to have, all the gaps that 3 months of lying had created. But Ellie was here, sitting in his kitchen, asking questions instead of walking away. That had to count for something. Can I ask you something now? Landon said. Okay. Why did you come here tonight, after everything I did, after how much I hurt you? Why give me a chance to explain? Ellie traced patterns on the marble counter. Because Oliver deserves better than losing another person he loves, and because... She stopped, started again. Because I read your letters, and I saw something in them that I didn't see when you were lying to me. What? Vulnerability. You weren't trying to manage my reaction or control the narrative. You were just honest. Scared and sorry and honest. And I thought maybe if you could write that, maybe you could actually be that in person too. I can. I will. I promise. Don't promise. Just do it. Over the next hour, they talked about everything. Landon told her about the board meetings and the corporate politics and the pressure of running a company that employed thousands of people. He told her about the investments and the charitable foundations and the wealth he'd accumulated almost by accident because he'd been too busy building things to spend money. He told her about the loneliness of success, how the higher he climbed, the fewer people he could trust, until everyone around him felt like they wanted something. Ellie listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she said, I get it now. Why you did what you did. You do? I don't agree with it. I'm still hurt by it, but I understand the impulse to want someone who sees you instead of what you have. That's all I wanted. Just to be seen. But Landon, you have to understand, I need to be seen too. And when you were pretending to be poor, when you were hiding this whole part of your life, you weren't really seeing me either. That hit harder than it should have. What do you mean? You saw me as this kind, genuine person who wouldn't care about money. But that's not all of who I am. I'm also someone who's been poor her whole life, who's had to fight for everything, who has complicated feelings about wealth and class and people who have what I don't. You didn't want to see that part because it might have complicated your test. You're right. I'm scared of your money, Landon. I'm scared it'll change me, or that people will think I'm with you because of it, or that I'll start to rely on it and lose myself. Those are real fears, and you need to take them seriously instead of just saying they don't matter. How do I do that? I don't know yet, but we figure it out together, or we don't figure it out at all. Fair enough. They talked until late, until Oliver came out rubbing his eyes and asking if Ellie was staying for dinner. She looked at Landon, and he tried not to let his hope show too obviously, and she said, "Maybe just for dinner." Mrs. Chen ordered Thai food because nobody trusted the kitchen for actual cooking yet, and they ate on the floor of the living room because Oliver insisted it was better that way. Ellie relaxed incrementally, laughing at Oliver's stories about school, helping him build a better block fortress, letting Landon catch her eye across the scattered takeout containers. When it was time for Oliver to go to bed, he hugged Ellie for a long time and made her promise to come back. "I'll try," she said. That's what grown-ups say when they mean maybe no. Sometimes it means maybe yes. After Oliver was asleep, Landon walked Ellie down to the lobby. The doorman nodded at them, and Landon could see the questions in his eyes. Who was this woman in her worn coat? Why was Mr. Pierce looking at her like that? But he kept them to himself. On the sidewalk, with Chicago's December wind cutting through them, Ellie turned to face Landon. "I can't promise this is going to work," she said. "I know. I'm still hurt, I'm still angry, and I don't know if I can trust you again. I understand. But I want to try. For Oliver, and for me too. Because I meant what I said before. I care about you. Both versions of you, I think. I just need time to figure out how they fit together. Take all the time you need. What if I need months? What if I need you to actually date me, the normal way, without any disguises or secrets? Then that's what we'll do." Ellie studied his face, looking for cracks in his sincerity. "You'd do that? Actually court me properly, like we're starting over?" "Yes. Even though that means going slow? Even though it means I might decide it's not worth it? Even though?" She nodded, seeming to come to some internal decision. "Okay. Then call me tomorrow. Not tonight, tomorrow. And we'll go on an actual date. Somewhere you'd normally go, not somewhere you think I'd be comfortable. I want to see your real life." "Are you sure?" "No, but I'm going to try anyway." And then she kissed him, quick and soft, and walked away before he could say anything else. Landon stood on the sidewalk watching her go, feeling like he'd just been given something precious and fragile that might shatter if he held it wrong. He called her the next day at noon, after spending the morning pacing and checking his phone and driving Mrs. Chen crazy with his nervous energy. "Hi," he said when she picked up. "Hi. I'd like to take you to dinner tonight, somewhere nice. Very nice, actually. Is that okay?" "Where?" "Alinea. I know the chef. He can get us a table." There was a pause, then, "That's one of the best restaurants in the country." "I know." "Landon, I can't afford—" "You're not paying. I'm taking you out. This is a date." Another pause. "I don't have anything to wear to a place like that." "Wear whatever you want. You'll be the most beautiful person there regardless." You can't just say things like that." "It's true." "Landon." "Sorry, too much?" "A little." But he could hear the smile in her voice. "What time?" "I'll pick you up at 7. He showed up at her apartment at 6:50 in a town car because driving himself felt too casual and the Bridgeport neighborhood didn't have parking anyway. Ellie came down wearing a simple black dress that she'd probably owned for years. And she was right. She didn't look like she belonged at Alinea. She looked better than anyone who would be there, prettier and more real than all the society women in their designer gowns. "You look incredible." Landon said. Ellie blushed. You have to say that. I really don't. The restaurant was everything Ellie had probably expected. Hushed and elegant and full of people who talked in low voices about things that didn't matter. The meal was 23 courses of molecular gastronomy and artistic presentation, each dish more elaborate than the last. Landon watched Ellie taste everything with the focused attention she brought to all food, analyzing flavors and techniques and presentation. What do you think? He asked after the 7th course. It's extraordinary. The precision, the creativity, it's like edible art. But, she smiled, but I miss flavor. I miss food that makes you feel like someone's grandmother made it with love. This is impressive, but it's not comforting. That's exactly what Caroline used to say. She hated these places. Did you bring her here? Once, she spent the whole meal making up stories about the other diners and trying to make me laugh. The staff was not amused. I like her. She would have liked you too. After dinner, Landon asked if she wanted to go anywhere else, but Ellie said she just wanted to walk. So they walked through downtown Chicago in December, past store windows decorated for Christmas, past couples taking selfies in front of the lights, past street musicians and late-night diners and all the life that happened after dark. Thank you for tonight, Ellie said, for not hiding your world from me. Thank you for giving me a chance to show it to you. Can I ask you something? Anything. Do you actually like that restaurant, or was it just showing me what your life looks like? Landon thought about it. Honestly, I'm usually too worried about whether I'm enjoying it correctly to actually enjoy it. I go because it's what people expect, because it's where deals get made, because it signals success. That sounds exhausting. It is. Then why do you do it? Because I thought that was part of being successful. Having the right house, eating at the right restaurants, knowing the right people. But you don't actually care about any of that. No. Ellie stopped walking. They were standing in front of a late-night pizza place, the kind with plastic tables and grease-stained menus, and a neon sign that said open in flickering letters. Can we get pizza? After a 23-course tasting menu? I'm still hungry. All those courses were beautiful, but I could fit each one on a spoon. Landon laughed, really laughed, and they went into the pizza place and ordered 2 slices and sat at a plastic table, and it was better than Alinea, better than any fancy restaurant he'd been to, because Ellie was laughing, relaxed, herself in a way she hadn't been in the hushed elegance of the expensive place. This is more like it, she said, taking a bite of pizza that was all cheese and grease and absolutely no molecular gastronomy. Your trouble, you know that? Good trouble or bad trouble? The best kind. They went on dates like that for weeks. Landon took her to the opera, and she fell asleep in the 3rd act. He took her to a gallery opening, and she spent the whole time talking to the artist about technique instead of networking with potential buyers. He took her to a charity gala, and she hid in the bathroom for 20 minutes because someone asked what she did, and she'd said, "I'm a student," and they'd looked at her like she'd admitted to being a waitress, which she was. Still. Because culinary school was in the afternoons, and she couldn't afford to quit Rosie's entirely. After the gala, sitting in the town car on the way back to her apartment, Ellie said, "I don't think I can do this." Landon's stomach dropped. Do what? This world. Your world. I spent all night feeling like everyone was judging me, like I didn't belong, like I was an imposter. You're not an imposter. Landon, someone asked me what my family did, and I said my grandmother was a waitress, and they actually laughed. They thought I was joking. They're snobs. Ignore them. But they're your people, your colleagues, your friends. They're not my friends. They're people I do business with. There's a difference. Ellie looked at him in the dim light of the car. Do you have any actual friends? The question caught him off guard. I have people I trust, Marcus, my CFO, some of my board members. That's not what I asked. Landon thought about it, about the last time he'd had a conversation that wasn't about work or Oliver or logistics, about the last time he'd called someone just to talk, to laugh, to be himself. No, he admitted, I don't think I do. That's really sad. I know. What happened to your college friends, your old life? I got busy. The company grew, Caroline got sick, Oliver was born, and when I looked up, everyone I used to know had moved on and I was surrounded by people who wanted something from me. Ellie reached over and took his hand. I'm sorry. Don't be. That was my choice. Still. They sat in silence for a while. Then Ellie said, I want to introduce you to my life. The real one, not the version you saw when you were pretending. Okay? Tomorrow. Come to my culinary class. So the next afternoon, Landon sat in the back of a community college classroom and watched Ellie work. She was transformed there, confident, focused, completely in her element. She asked questions that made the instructor pause and think. She helped other students who were struggling. She created a sauce that made everyone in the room stop and taste it, trying to figure out what she'd done. After class, she introduced him to her classmates, not as a billionaire or a CEO, just as my boyfriend Landon. They were nice to him in the way people are nice to strangers, asking polite questions, including him in their plans to grab coffee. In the coffee shop, surrounded by students half his age, talking about knife skills and mother sauces and their dreams of opening restaurants, Landon felt more comfortable than he had at the gala. You fit here, Ellie said later when they were walking to her apartment. In a community college coffee shop? With regular people. People who aren't trying to impress you or use you. You're more yourself. I'm more myself with you. She smiled. Smooth. Too much? A little, but I'll allow it. At her apartment, Ellie made them dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta with a sauce she was testing for class. And they ate at her small table that wobbled and talked about everything and nothing. Oliver called halfway through to tell them about his day, and Ellie put him on speaker and asked him serious questions about his art project and his friend who'd gotten in trouble at recess. After they hung up, Ellie said, He's a good kid. He misses you, asks about you every day. I miss him too. You could see him more, if you wanted. I do want. But Landon, if this doesn't work out between us, it'll break his heart again. And yours? Mine too. So we make sure it works out. Ellie put down her fork. It's not that simple. We're from completely different worlds. You have money and power and options I can't even imagine. Eventually you're going to realize that I'm just... Don't finish that sentence. Why not? Because whatever you're about to say about yourself is wrong. You're not just anything. You're brilliant and talented and kind, and the fact that you think your grandmother being a waitress is something to apologize for instead of something to be proud of makes me want to find everyone who made you feel small and have some very pointed conversations. Ellie's eyes filled with tears. You can't fix this with pretty words. I'm not trying to fix anything. I'm telling you the truth. The truth is that I'm scared of your world, of not being enough, of losing myself in all of this. Landon moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands. Then we'll go slow. We'll figure it out together. And if my world is too much, if those people make you feel like you don't belong, then we'll find a different world, one that's just ours. You can't just abandon your life. I can do whatever I want. That's the point of being successful. I get to choose. But the company will be fine. I have good people running it. I've been scaling back anyway, letting them handle more. The board's been on me for years to groom a successor. You do that? Actually step back from the thing you built? For you and Oliver? Yes. Ellie pulled her hands away, stood up, paced the small space of her apartment. That's too much pressure. I can't be the reason you walk away from your legacy. You're not the reason. You're the excuse. I've been wanting out for years. I just didn't know what else to do with myself. And now you do? I want to be with you. I want to raise Oliver somewhere that feels like home instead of a museum. I want to figure out what matters and stop pretending that quarterly earnings and stock prices are it. What if you get bored? What if 6 months from now you're sitting in my small apartment eating my practice dinners and you realize you miss your old life? That's not going to happen. You don't know that. I do. Because I already tried the old life, Ellie. I had everything anyone could want and I was miserable. And then I spent 3 months in a tiny apartment in Bridgeport with you, and I was happier than I'd been in years. That means something. Ellie stopped pacing, looked at him with something like hope. You really mean that? Every word. She crossed the room, stood in front of him, studied his face like she was looking for lies. Okay. Okay, what? Okay, let's try this, for real. No more tests, no more disguises. Just us, figuring it out as we go. You mean it? I'm terrified, and this is probably a terrible idea, and I have no clue how we're going to make this work, but yes, I mean it. Landon pulled her into his arms, held her tight, felt her heart beating against his chest. We'll figure it out. Promise? Promise. And for the first time since Greg had called his name outside the competition, Landon felt like maybe they actually would. Figuring it out turned out to be messier than either of them anticipated. The first real fight happened 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning when Landon showed up at Ellie's apartment with a check for $50,000. What is this? Ellie asked, staring at the paper like it might explode. It's for culinary school. The scholarship covered tuition, but you're still working double shifts to afford supplies and living expenses. This would let you focus on school full time. I can't accept this. Why not? Because it's $50,000, Landon. That's more money than I've made in the last 3 years combined. So? I have it. You need it. Problem solved. Ellie put the check down on her counter like it was contaminated. This is exactly what I was afraid of. You swooping in with money, fixing my problems without asking, making me feel like a charity case. You're not a charity case. You're my girlfriend, and I want to help you. By throwing money at me? By removing obstacles so you can chase your dreams. What's wrong with that? Everything. Ellie's voice rose. Everything is wrong with it. I need to do this myself, Landon. I need to know I earned it, that I'm capable of building a life without someone bankrolling me. That's pride talking. Damn right it's pride. It's all I have. Landon picked up the check, tried to hand it to her. Take the money, please. No. Ellie, I said no. And if you can't respect that, if you're going to keep trying to solve my problems with your checkbook, then this isn't going to work. She meant it. Landon could see it in her eyes, the hard line she was drawing. He put the check back in his pocket and felt like he'd failed some test he didn't know he was taking. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't mean to overstep. But you did, and you'll do it again because you're used to fixing things with money. That's how your world works. Then tell me how your world works. Help me understand. Ellie sat down at her small table, suddenly looking tired. In my world, you offer to help, and I get to say yes or no. You don't just decide what I need and hand it to me. You ask first. Okay, can I ask now? No, because I already told you no, and you're just going to wear me down until I say yes. She was right. That was exactly what he'd been planning to do. What if I want to take you to dinner? Landon asked. Is that allowed, or is that also me throwing money around? Dinner is different. That's a date. What's the line between a date and charity? I don't know, but I know it when I see it. They sat in tense silence. Then Landon said, What if I hire you? What? To cook, for me and Oliver, private chef, whatever rate you think is fair. That way it's a job, not charity. Ellie stared at him. You're serious? Completely. You need money. I need someone to cook for us who isn't Mrs. Chen. No offense to her, but her dumplings are better than her pasta, and Oliver would love it. Win-win. That's manipulative. It's a job offer. It's you finding a loophole so you can help me without me feeling like charity. Is it working? Ellie laughed despite herself. You're impossible. I'm resourceful. You're stubborn. So are you. She shook her head, but she was smiling now. I'll think about it. That's not a no. It's not a yes either. But a week later, Ellie showed up at the penthouse with her knives and a grocery list, and she cooked dinner for them 3 nights a week. Landon paid her what he'd pay any private chef, which was more than she made at Rosie's, but not so much that it felt like charity. She tested recipes on them, asked for feedback, turned their meals into a laboratory for her culinary education. Oliver was thrilled. Mrs. Chen was relieved, and Landon got to watch Ellie work in his kitchen, transforming the sterile space into something that smelled like garlic and herbs and home. But the money thing kept coming up. When Ellie's car broke down and Landon offered to buy her a new one, she said no. When her apartment building announced a rent increase and Landon suggested she move into the penthouse, she said absolutely not. When her nephew needed expensive asthma medication and Landon tried to pay for it, she actually yelled at him. You have to let me help you, Landon said after that fight. Why? Because I love you and I have resources, and it kills me to watch you struggle with things I could fix in 5 minutes. But they're my struggles, my life, and if you fix everything, what does that make me? It makes you someone who accepts help from people who care about you. It makes me dependent. It makes me someone who can't function without you. And then what happens if this doesn't work out? If you leave, if something happens to you, if... She stopped, her hand shaking worse than he'd seen in months. I've lost everyone, Landon. My mom, my grandma, everyone I've ever depended on. I can't do that again. And there it was, the real fear underneath all the pride and independence. Not that she'd become a charity case, but that she'd let herself need him, and then he'd be gone. I'm not going anywhere, Landon said softly. You don't know that. I do. Caroline died. You didn't plan for that. You didn't expect it. But it happened anyway. She had a point. Landon crossed the room, took Ellie's shaking hands in his. You're right. I can't promise nothing bad will ever happen. But I can promise that I'm choosing this, choosing you, every single day. And if something happens to me, you'll be taken care of. I don't want to be taken care of. I want to be capable of taking care of myself. Those aren't mutually exclusive. Ellie pulled her hands away, wrapped her arms around herself. I need you to understand something. My whole life, I've been invisible to people with money. They look through me, talk over me, treat me like I don't matter. And then you came along and saw me, really saw me, and it was everything I didn't know I needed. But I can't become someone who only matters because she's with you. I have to matter on my own. You do matter on your own. Then let me prove it. Stop trying to fix everything and just be with me. Let me struggle sometimes. Let me figure things out. It went against every instinct Landon had, but he said, okay. Really? Really? But if you need help, you have to ask. Deal? Deal. They shook on it like business partners. And then Landon pulled her into a kiss that tasted like compromise and trust, and the beginning of actually understanding each other. The second big fight happened a month later, when Landon's company made the news for a merger that would increase its value by billions. The article mentioned Landon by name, included a photo of him from some old press release, and discussed his personal life in a way that made Ellie's privacy feel violated. Sources close to Pierce say he's been seeing someone seriously, a marked change from his reclusive behavior following his wife's death 2 years ago. She read aloud from her phone. They've been spotted at various restaurants around Chicago, though Pierce has kept his companion's identity private. I didn't talk to them, Landon said. I never talked to them. But someone did. Someone you know is talking about me to reporters. They're not talking about you specifically. They don't even have your name. Yet. How long before someone connects the dots? Before there's a photographer outside my apartment or showing up at Rosie's? Landon wanted to say it wouldn't happen, but he'd seen how these things went. Someone would eventually get curious enough to dig, to follow him, to piece together who the mystery woman was. I'll hire security. That's not the point. Then what is the point? The point is that your life is public in a way mine never has been, and I don't know if I can handle that. They were in the penthouse, standing in the living room where they'd had their first honest conversation months ago. Ellie looked small against the backdrop of floor-to-ceiling windows and expensive art, and Landon realized she was right to be scared. His world would eventually swallow her privacy whole if she let it. We could go away, Landon said. Leave Chicago. I could sell the company, and we could move somewhere quiet where nobody knows us. You can't sell your company. I could. Landon, stop. Stop offering to burn down your life for me. It's not burning it down. It's choosing what matters. But that's the problem. You keep choosing me over everything else, and eventually you're going to resent me for it. That's not true. It is. You say you're happy giving things up, but you built that company from nothing. You're proud of it, even if you don't admit it, and asking you to walk away from it, to hide from your own success, that's not fair to either of us. Landon sat down on the couch, feeling the weight of everything they were trying to navigate. So what do we do? Ellie sat next to him, not touching, but close. We figure out how to live in your world without me disappearing into it. You keep running your company because it's part of who you are. And I keep building my career because it's part of who I am. And we find a way to be together that doesn't require either of us to become someone we're not. That sounds difficult. Most good things are. She was right again. Ellie had a habit of being right about things that Landon wanted to argue with, but couldn't. I'm scared too, he admitted, that this won't work, that my world will be too much for you, that you'll wake up one day and realize being with me isn't worth all the complications. Then we're both scared. Good. We can be scared together. That became their new normal, being scared together. Ellie started seeing a therapist twice a week to work through her anxiety about money and class and whether she belonged in Landon's life. Landon kept seeing Dr. Kim to work through his control issues and his fear of losing people he loved. They had hard conversations about what their future could look like, what compromises they could both live with, what lines they wouldn't cross. And slowly, in increments too small to notice day to day, they built something real. Oliver helped. He was the bridge between them, the reason they kept trying when things got hard. He started calling Ellie Mom casually one day in March, like it was the most natural thing in the world, and Ellie had cried in the kitchen while Oliver asked if he'd said something wrong. No, baby, she'd said, pulling him into a hug. You said something perfect. After that, she was more present. She moved some of her things into the penthouse. Not all of them. She kept her apartment because she needed space that was just hers, but enough that it felt like she lived there part-time. She cooked dinner most nights when she wasn't at class or working at Rosie's. She helped Oliver with his homework, read him bedtime stories, taught him to make cookies that were better than any expensive bakery could produce. And she started to relax around Landon's world. Not completely, but enough to attend board dinners without hiding in the bathroom. Enough to meet his business partners and hold her own in conversations about things she didn't care about. Enough to wear the nice dress he'd bought her without feeling like she was selling out. You're getting better at this, Rosie observed one afternoon at the diner, where Ellie still picked up shifts on weekends because she couldn't quite let go of the place that had been her anchor for so long. At what? Being with him. You stopped looking like you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. I'm still waiting. I'm just not waiting as hard. That's progress. It was progress. Slow, messy, imperfect progress, but progress nonetheless. The turning point came in late April, 6 months after the cooking competition disaster, when Ellie graduated from her culinary program. The ceremony was small and casual, held in the community college auditorium, with folding chairs and a banner that said, "Congratulations, graduates," in letters that were slightly crooked. Ellie wore her chef's whites under her graduation gown, and when they called her name, Landon and Oliver cheered louder than anyone. After the ceremony, standing outside in the spring sunshine with her diploma in hand, Ellie said, "I did it." "You did," Landon agreed. "On my own, with my own money, my own work. I'm proud of you." "I'm proud of me too." She looked at him, her eyes bright. "Thank you for not trying to fix this one." "It was hard. I know. But you let me struggle and succeed on my own terms. That matters more than you realize." Oliver ran up with Mrs. Chen, both of them carrying flowers they'd bought from a vendor outside. "These are for you," Oliver said, presenting them with the seriousness of a knight presenting a sword. Ellie took the flowers, kissed Oliver's forehead, and looked at Landon with something like peace in her expression. "What happens now?" "Whatever you want. I want to open a restaurant. Small, maybe 20 tables. Comfort food done right, the way my grandma taught me." "Okay. I'll need to save money, get investors, find a location. It'll take years. Or I could—" "Landon." He held up his hands. "I was going to say I could help you write a business plan, use my connections to find investors who aren't me, support you without fixing everything." Ellie considered this. "That would be okay." "Really? Really? As long as you let me do the actual work." "Deal." They went to dinner that night at a restaurant Ellie had chosen. Not expensive, not fancy, just good food made by people who cared. Oliver fell asleep in the booth halfway through dessert, his head on Ellie's shoulder, and Landon watched them and felt something settle in his chest that had been unsettled since Caroline died. This was what family looked like. Not perfect, not easy, but real. Built on honesty instead of tests, on trust instead of control, on two people choosing each other even when it was hard. "What are you thinking about?" Ellie asked. "How lucky I am." "Don't get sappy on me. Too late." She smiled, reached across the table to take his hand. "I love you, even when you're annoying with your money and your need to fix everything. I love you too, even when you're stubborn about accepting help. We're a mess, aren't we? The best kind of mess." The restaurant plans took longer than expected. Ellie spent a year working at various high-end restaurants to learn how professional kitchens operated, how to manage staff, how to turn her grandmother's recipes into dishes that could be made at scale. She saved every penny she made, kept detailed notes, refined her concept until it was something investors could believe in. Landon helped where he was allowed to help, connecting her with restaurant owners he knew, reviewing her business plan, offering advice when she asked for it. But he let her drive, let her make mistakes, let her build something that was entirely hers. They got engaged on a Tuesday, unceremoniously, in her apartment over takeout Chinese food. Landon didn't do the grand gesture thing because Ellie would have hated it. He just said, "Will you marry me?" And she said yes, obviously, and they told Oliver the next morning over pancakes. "Does this mean Ellie's my mom for real now?" Oliver asked. "If that's okay with you," Ellie said. "It's extremely okay." The wedding was small, just family and close friends, held at Rosie's diner because that's where they'd met, where everything had started. Rosie cried through the whole ceremony. Mrs. Chen gave a speech about how she'd known from the beginning that Ellie was the one, which was a lie, but a sweet one. Oliver was the ring bearer and took his job so seriously that everyone laughed and cried at the same time. Landon wore a suit, but not one of his expensive ones. Something simple that fit the setting. Ellie wore a dress from a vintage shop, cream-colored and simple, with her grandmother's pearls. When they said their vows, they promised honesty and trust, and the willingness to keep choosing each other even when it was hard. "No more disguises," Landon promised. "No more running away," Ellie promised back. They kissed to applause and hooting from the small crowd, and then they all ate banana cream pie because what else would you serve at a diner wedding? The restaurant opened 2 years later. Ellie called it Julia's after her grandmother, and it was exactly what she'd envisioned, small and warm, with food that tasted like love. The reviews were incredible. The wait list was months long. People came from across the country to eat Ellie's elevated comfort food and sit in a space that felt like coming home. Landon was proud in a way that had nothing to do with his own accomplishments. He'd show Oliver articles about the restaurant, tell anyone who'd listened that his wife was one of the best chefs in Chicago, beam when food critics praised her innovative take on traditional dishes. "You're worse than a stage mom," Ellie teased one night, reading a review that called her a revelation in the culinary world. "I'm proud of you. Sue me. You helped make this happen." "You made this happen. I just provided support." "You did more than that. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." That's what families do. And they were a family now, fully and completely. Oliver was 8, thriving in school, drawing pictures of 3 people with no empty spaces. Ellie was successful and confident, her shaking hand steady in the kitchen she'd built. And Landon had learned that loving someone meant letting them be themselves, meant supporting without controlling, meant being vulnerable enough to need them as much as they needed him. Sometimes, late at night when Oliver was asleep and the restaurant was closed and they were alone in the penthouse that felt less empty now, Landon would think about that rainy evening when he'd first walked into Rosie's diner, about the plan that seemed so brilliant in his grief and desperation, about how close he'd come to losing everything because he'd been too scared to be honest. "What would you have done?" he asked Ellie one of those nights. "If I'd walked in as myself from the beginning, as Landon Pierce, billionaire CEO." Ellie thought about it. "I probably would have assumed you were lost, that someone like you wouldn't be in a place like Rosie's. And if I'd asked you out? I would have said no. I would have thought you were playing a game or slumming or looking for something to tell your rich friends about." So the disguise worked. No, the disguise was a lie. What worked was you eventually being honest, being scared and sorry and vulnerable. That's what made me give you a second chance. I almost didn't get one. "I know, you got lucky. I really did." She kissed him, soft and certain, and Landon thought about how strange it was that his plan to find someone genuine had only worked when he'd stopped planning and started being genuine himself. How he'd tested Ellie to see if she'd love Oliver without knowing about the money, but in the end, Ellie had tested him right back, to see if he could be honest enough, humble enough, real enough to actually deserve her love. And somehow, messily and imperfectly, they'd both passed. The truth was, Landon had learned you couldn't find real connection through deception. You couldn't build trust on a foundation of lies. You couldn't love someone completely while hiding who you were. He'd tried, and it had almost cost him everything that mattered. But he'd also learned that people were more forgiving than he'd given them credit for. That second chances existed if you were willing to do the hard work of actually changing. That family wasn't about blood or money or perfect circumstances. It was about showing up, being honest, and choosing each other every day, even when it would be easier not to. Oliver understood this better than either of them. One morning at breakfast, when he was 9, he said, "Dad, remember when we pretended to be poor?" "I remember." "That was dumb," Landon laughed. "Yeah, it was. But I'm glad you did it because that's how we found Mom." Ellie reached over and ruffled Oliver's hair. "Your dad made a lot of mistakes, but I'm glad that one led to us, too. Are you going to tell me about those mistakes when I'm older, so I don't do the same dumb things?" "Definitely," Landon said. "I'm going to tell you all about how I lied to the woman I loved, because I was too scared to be vulnerable, and how it almost destroyed everything, and how the best decision I ever made was finally telling the truth. That's a lot." "It is. But it has a happy ending." "It does." Oliver went back to his cereal, satisfied with this explanation. Ellie caught Landon's eye across the table and smiled, and in that moment Landon understood that the happy ending wasn't the point. The point was that they'd earned it, through honesty and hard conversations, and the willingness to be imperfect together. Years later, when people asked how they'd met, Landon would tell them the truth. Not a sanitized version, not a romantic reimagining, but the actual story of a man who'd lost his way and found it again in the last place he expected. He'd tell them about the disguise and the diner and the lie that almost ruined everything. He'd tell them about Ellie's courage in giving him a second chance and his own struggle to deserve it. And he'd end by saying that the best things in life couldn't be tested or controlled or managed. They could only be chosen every single day with honesty and hope and the understanding that loving someone meant being brave enough to let them see all of you, the billionaire and the scared single dad and everything in between. Ellie's version of the story was simpler. When people asked how they met, she'd say, "He walked into my diner one rainy night and he was a complete disaster of a human being. But he had a sweet kid and he made me laugh, and eventually he figured out how to be honest. And that made all the difference." Both versions were true. Both versions were incomplete. But together, they told the story of a family that almost wasn't, built by two imperfect people who learned that real love required real honesty, and that the hardest thing about finding someone genuine was being genuine enough yourself to recognize them when they appeared. On Oliver's 10th birthday, he made a wish over his cake and wouldn't tell anyone what it was. But later that night, Landon found a new drawing tucked into his son's schoolwork. 3 people in front of a house, all of them holding hands, all of them smiling. No empty spaces, no missing pieces. Just a family, complete and imperfect and exactly right. And that, Landon thought, was worth more than all the penthouses and private jets and quarterly earnings in the world. Because at the end of the day, what mattered wasn't what you had or what you could buy or how successfully you could test people's intentions. What mattered was showing up honestly, loving imperfectly, and having the courage to be seen completely by the people who mattered most. The disguise had been a mistake, but the woman he'd found while wearing it, the shy waitress with shaking hands and a grandmother's recipes and more strength than she knew, she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. And the fact that she'd chosen to love him anyway, despite everything, taught Landon more about grace and forgiveness and second chances than any amount of success ever could. In the end, it wasn't about finding someone who passed a test. It was about becoming someone worthy of being chosen. And that was a lesson Landon carried with him every single day, in every honest word, in every moment of vulnerability, in every choice to be real instead of perfect. Because perfect was a lie. But real, messy and complicated and sometimes painful real, that was where life actually happened. That was where love grew. And that was exactly where Landon Pierce, formerly disguised single dad and current husband to an extraordinary chef, wanted to be.